The day Nora Hale decided to give away her children, the Wyoming sun burned white-hot overhead, turning the world into a furnace of dust and despair. With her husband 6 feet under and her babies crying from hunger she couldn't satisfy, she had run out of choices. The walk to town would seal their fates. She would hand them to strangers and pray God would forgive her. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans. Sometimes salvation comes riding on a chestnut stallion, wearing a weathered hat and carrying secrets of its own. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale of hope and heartbreak travels across the world. The earth had forgotten how to breathe. For 3 months, the Wyoming Territory had baked under a sun that showed no mercy, turning fertile soil into powder and green fields into graveyards. The wind that swept across the high plains carried no relief, only more dust, more heat, more reminders that nature had turned her back on the settlers who dared to call this harsh land home. Nora Hale stood in what used to be her garden, her calloused hands hanging limp at her sides, her eyes fixed on the wooden cross that marked her husband's grave. The cross stood crooked. She'd planted it herself, her hand shaking so badly she couldn't get it straight, and now it leaned slightly to the east, as if even in death, Thomas was trying to escape this cursed place. "Mama?" The small voice came from behind her, thin and uncertain. Nora didn't turn around immediately. She couldn't. If she looked at them now, at their hollowed cheeks and 2 large eyes, she would break completely, and she needed to stay strong just a little longer, just until she could walk them into town, just until she could hand them over to someone who could feed them. "Yes, baby?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Is Papa still sleeping?" 7-year-old Samuel had asked that question every day for the past 2 weeks, ever since they'd lowered Thomas into the ground. Each time Nora gave the same answer, the only one a child that young could understand. "Yes, sweetheart. Papa's resting now." "When will he wake up?" This time Nora did turn. Samuel stood in the doorway of their cabin. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had been theirs, holding his little sister's hand. Emma was only 4, with blonde curls that had once bounced when she ran, but now hung limp and dull around her thin face. Both children looked at their mother with the kind of trust that made Nora's heart crack a little more. "Come inside," she said softly, "out of the sun." The interior of the cabin offered little relief from the heat. The single room that served as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom trapped the warmth like an oven. Nora had opened both windows, but the air that drifted through was as hot as the air inside, carrying with it the perpetual dust that coated everything, got into everything, became part of everything. A pot sat on the cold stove, containing the last of their water. Nora had been rationing it carefully, giving most of it to the children, but even that was running low. The well had run dry 3 days after Thomas died, as if the earth itself was mourning him. "Mama, I'm hungry," Emma whimpered, pressing her small body against Nora's leg. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Nora moved to the cupboard, a crude wooden box Thomas had built their first year here, when hope was still possible, and opened it. Inside sat the remainder of their provisions, a handful of cornmeal, maybe enough for 1 more thin porridge. After that, nothing. The garden had yielded nothing. The chickens had stopped laying weeks ago, then died one by one until Nora had buried the last one yesterday. Even if they'd had seed to plant, the ground was too hard, too dry, too dead. She measured out the cornmeal carefully, mixing it with the precious water to make a watery paste that couldn't truthfully be called food. The children ate it without complaint, scraping their wooden bowls clean with their fingers, and Nora pretended to eat her share while actually dividing it between their bowls when they weren't looking. "Tell us a story, Mama," Samuel said when they'd finished, his voice hopeful. "Tell us about the ocean." Stories had been their escape these past terrible months. Nora would tell them about the Atlantic coast where she'd grown up, about waves that rolled in endless and blue, about sand that was soft instead of harsh, about fish so plentiful you could catch them with your hands. She'd tell them about her father's ship, about cities with buildings that touched the sky, about a world so different from this barren wasteland that it seemed like a fairy tale. But today Nora couldn't find the words. Today, the stories felt like lies. "Not today, baby," she said quietly. Today, we need to take a walk. Where are we going? Samuel asked, perking up slightly. He was so thin now that his shirt hung on him like a sack, but he still had that spark of curiosity that all children possess, that belief that tomorrow might be better than today. To town, Nora said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. To Sweetwater Junction. Is it far? A few miles. Can I ride on your shoulders like Papa used to let me? The question pierced her like a blade. Thomas had been so good with them, so patient. He'd carried Samuel on his shoulders even when he was exhausted from working the land, would spin Emma around until she squealed with laughter, would hold Nora at night and promise her that everything would work out, that they just needed to hold on a little longer, that the rain would come, that their luck would turn. But the rain never came, and neither did their luck. And Thomas had worked himself to exhaustion trying to dig a new well, trying to save dying crops, trying to do the impossible. He'd collapsed one afternoon in the middle of the field, the sun beating down on him, and by the time Nora reached him, he was already gone. The doctor in town said it was his heart, gave out from strain and heat and despair. You're getting too big for that, Nora managed to say. You're a big boy now. Papa said that I was big too, Samuel replied proudly. He said that I was the man of the house when he was working. You are, Nora whispered. You're so brave, Samuel. Both of you are so brave. She gathered what little they had, an extra dress for Emma, a shirt for Samuel, the small cloth bag that held the few dollars she had left from selling their cow last month. Everything else would stay here, abandoned, another marker of broken dreams in a territory full of them. The walk into town would take about 3 hours in this heat. They'd need to rest frequently. The children's legs were so thin now, so weak, but they had to do it today. Tomorrow would be too late. Tomorrow, they might not have the strength. Why are we bringing our clothes, Mama? Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. Nora knelt down, taking both children's hands in hers. She'd practiced this moment in her mind 100 times, trying to find the right words, but there were no right words for what she was about to do. Listen to me, both of you, she said, forcing herself to meet their trusting eyes. You know how Papa's in heaven now? They nodded solemnly. Well, Mama needs to make sure you're taken care of while I find us a new place to live, a place with food and water and... Are you leaving us? Samuel's voice cracked, and Nora saw fear flash across his young face, the same fear she'd been trying to keep at bay. No, baby, no, I would never... But she was leaving them, wasn't she? She was walking them into town to hand them over to Reverend Matthews, who would find families to take them in, families who could feed them. And she would... What? Die out here alone? Try to find work somewhere, somehow send for them later? The plan, such as it was, fell apart every time she examined it too closely. Then why do we need our clothes? Because we might need to stay in town for a little while, Nora said, hating herself for the lie. Just until I can find work. I can work too, Samuel said eagerly. Papa taught me to use a hammer. I can build things. The earnestness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. He was 7 years old. He should be playing, learning to read, dreaming about the future. Instead, he was offering to work, to help carry a burden that no child should have to bear. You're wonderful, Nora said, pulling both children into her arms, breathing in the scent of them, dust and sweat, and something indefinably precious. Both of you are so wonderful. I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, don't you? We love you too, Mama, Emma said, her small arms wrapping around Nora's neck. For a long moment, Nora held them, wondering if she could do this, if she could actually go through with it. Maybe there was another way. Maybe if she just held on one more day, one more week, something would change. Maybe... But no, she'd been telling herself maybe for weeks now, watching them get thinner, watching the life drain out of them day by day. Hope wasn't going to feed them. Wishes weren't going to bring the rain. She had to face reality, no matter how much it destroyed her. Come on, she said finally, releasing them and standing up. We need to go while it's still light. They stepped out of the cabin into the brutal afternoon sun. Nora took one last look at the place that had been their home for 3 years. It hadn't been much, but Thomas had built it with his own hands, had carried her over the threshold with such pride, such hope. They were going to build a life here, raise their children, grow old together watching the sunset over the mountains. Instead, she was leaving it all behind: the cabin, the garden grave, the dreams. Everything except the two small hands clasped in hers. The road to Sweetwater Junction stretched out before them, a dusty ribbon cutting through the desolate landscape. On either side, abandoned homesteads dotted the plains. Other families who'd given up, who'd packed what they could and returned east or south or anywhere that promised water and life. The Hales had stayed longer than most, Thomas insisting they could weather the drought, that their luck would turn. Pride had kept them here. Pride was going to cost them everything. They walked slowly, Nora matching her pace to the children's shorter legs. The sun hammered down on them, relentless and unforgiving. Nora had wrapped her shawl around her head and made the children wear their hats, but it provided little protection. The heat was inescapable. After about an hour, they stopped to rest in the meager shade of a dead cottonwood tree. Nora gave the children the last of the water, ignoring her own parched throat. Emma's little face was flushed red from the heat, and Samuel's breathing came too fast, too shallow. "We'll rest here a bit," Nora said, trying to sound cheerful. "Then it's not much farther." "Mama, I don't feel good," Emma whimpered. Panic fluttered in Nora's chest. She pressed her hand against Emma's forehead, hot, but whether from the sun or from fever, she couldn't tell. She'd seen children die out here from the heat, from dehydration, from any number of things that would have been treatable back east, but were deadly in this harsh land. "Just rest, sweetheart," Nora said, pulling Emma into her lap. "Close your eyes for a minute." Samuel leaned against her shoulder, and for a few moments they sat there in the insufficient shade, a small cluster of humanity in an empty world. Nora closed her own eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say to a God who'd let this happen? Who'd taken Thomas and turned the land to dust and left her with this impossible choice? She must have dozed off, because when she opened her eyes again, the sun had shifted lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Emma was still sleeping in her lap, her breathing steady. Samuel had moved a few feet away and was drawing patterns in the dust with a stick. "Samuel, we need to—" The sound of hoofbeats cut her off. Nora's head snapped up, her body tensing instinctively. Out here, a rider could mean help or danger, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. The figure emerged from the heat shimmer like a mirage. A tall man on a chestnut stallion, riding easy in the saddle with the confidence of someone who'd spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. As he drew closer, Nora could make out more details. A worn hat pulled low against the sun, a dark shirt dusty from travel, a face that was hard to read in the shadows but seemed neither threatening nor friendly, just watchful. The rider slowed as he approached, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. When he was about 20 feet away, he stopped completely, sitting still in the saddle as if giving her time to assess him, to decide whether to run or stay. Nora's arm tightened protectively around Emma. Samuel had come to stand beside her, his small hand reaching for hers. "Afternoon, ma'am," the rider said, his voice low and measured. He made no move to dismount, which Nora appreciated, keeping his distance, respecting her space. "You folks all right out here?" Nora lifted her chin, trying to summon some dignity despite their obvious circumstances. A widow and two children sitting under a dead tree in the middle of nowhere, clearly in distress. "We're fine," she said, the lie automatic. "Just resting on our way to town." The rider's gaze swept over them, slowly, assessing, but not in a way that felt invasive. It was the look of someone who knew hardship when he saw it, who'd probably seen plenty of families in circumstances just like theirs. "Sweetwater Junction?" he asked. "Yes?" He nodded slowly, then glanced up at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the horizon. "Still got a ways to go. Be dark before you make it. Walking." "We'll manage." "Didn't say you wouldn't." He shifted slightly in the saddle, and for the first time Nora could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 30 or so, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green, like water in a creek bed. There were lines at the corners of those eyes, carved by sun and wind and probably a lot of hard years, but they weren't cruel lines. They were just weathered, worn, the face of someone who'd lived a lot of life. A long moment of silence stretched between them. The horse shifted, and the man reached down to pat its neck, a gentle, automatic gesture. "Name's Caleb Vance," he said finally. "I'm scouting ahead for a cattle drive coming up from Colorado. We'll be passing through here day after tomorrow." Nora wasn't sure why he was offering this information, what he expected her to do with it. "I'm Nora Hale. These are my children, Samuel and Emma." Caleb touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." His eyes moved to the children again, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or memory, or something Nora couldn't quite name. "Hot day for walking." "Every day's hot," Samuel piped up, and Nora squeezed his hand in gentle warning, but Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "That's a fact, son. That's surely a fact." He was quiet for another moment, then seemed to come to some kind of decision. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen in a cloth-wrapped bundle. "You folks got water?" "We're fine," Nora said again, pride stiffening her spine. They'd lost everything, but she still had that at least. The ability to refuse charity, to stand on her own 2 feet. Caleb's eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there. He knew what she was doing, knew the cost of that pride. And he didn't push. Instead, he just held out the canteen. "Horse has plenty," he said simply. "And I got more jerky than I need. Be doing me a favor, lightening my load." It was a lie, a kind one, and they both knew it, but it was offered with enough grace that Nora could accept it without feeling like she was begging. Her throat was so dry it hurt, and Emma's flush worried her, and Samuel's eyes had fixed on that cloth bundle with the desperate hunger of a child who didn't quite remember what it felt like to be full. "That's very kind of you," Nora said quietly. Caleb dismounted in one fluid motion and walked over, but he stopped a respectful distance away and set the canteen and food on the ground rather than handing them directly to her, giving her space, letting her maintain some semblance of control. "Much obliged," he said, as if she'd done him a favor instead of the other way around. Then he stepped back, giving them privacy. Nora opened the canteen and gave Emma the first drink, watching anxiously as her daughter swallowed. The water seemed to revive her a bit, bringing some clarity back to her eyes. Samuel drank next, and then Nora allowed herself a few sips. It was the most wonderful thing she'd tasted in weeks. Cool, clean, life-giving water. The jerky was tough and salty, but it was protein, sustenance, and the children tore into it with an enthusiasm that made Nora's heart ache. She forced herself to eat too, knowing she needed her strength for what was coming. Caleb had walked a little distance away, ostensibly checking his horse's hooves, but really, Nora suspected, giving them privacy to eat without feeling watched. When they'd finished, he came back, his movement slow and unthreatening. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He nodded, then crouched down so he was at eye level with the children rather than looming over them. "You folks got people in Sweetwater Junction?" The question was casual, conversational, but Nora heard the real inquiry beneath it. "Why are you walking into town with nothing but the clothes on your backs?" "We're going to see Reverend Matthews," she said, the words sticking in her throat. Caleb's eyes sharpened slightly, and she knew he understood. In towns like Sweetwater Junction, folks went to the Reverend for 3 things: weddings, funerals, and charity, and they weren't dressed for a wedding. "Your husband?" He let the question trail off delicately. "Buried 2 weeks ago," Nora said flatly. "The drought took the crops. The heat took him. I'm sorry." The words were simple, but they were sincere, and somehow that made them worse. Nora felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry. Not here, not now, not in front of this stranger who'd shown them more kindness in 10 minutes than anyone else had in weeks. "The Reverend's a good man," Caleb said after a moment. "Known to help folks in need." "Yes," Nora whispered. That was what she was counting on, that Reverend Matthews would help, that he'd find families to take her children, that he'd save them from starving with a mother too broken to feed them. Caleb studied her face for a long moment, and Nora had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, could read all the desperate thoughts she was trying to hide. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "What kind of help you looking for, ma'am?" The question hung in the air between them. Nora could lie. could maintain the pretense, but suddenly she was too tired, too worn down, too desperate. What did it matter if this stranger knew? He'd be gone tomorrow, riding north with his cattle drive, and she'd be… where? Alone somewhere? Dead? Did it even matter? I'm going to ask him to find homes for my children, she said, the words coming out in a rush, like poison she needed to purge. I can't feed them. I can't keep them alive. I thought I could hold on, thought something would change, but it's not going to change. The land's dead. My husband's dead. And if I keep them with me, they'll die too. Samuel made a small, frightened sound, and Nora realized with horror that she'd said all of that in front of him. She pulled him against her side, Emma still in her lap, both children clinging to her now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, babies. Mama's so sorry. Caleb was very still, his face unreadable. Then he stood up and walked a few paces away, his back to them, his hands on his hips as he stared out at the empty horizon. Nora watched him, wondering what he was thinking, wondering if he was disgusted by her. What kind of mother gave her children away? When he turned back, his expression was determined. There's another option, he said. Nora looked up at him, barely daring to hope. What? Place called Eagle Bend Ranch, about 20 miles north of Sweetwater Junction. Big operation, runs several thousand head of cattle. They're always looking for workers, especially this time of year. Kitchen help, laundry, cleaning, that sort of thing. The pay's not much, but it comes with room and board. I don't have any experience with… You can learn, Caleb interrupted. And they've got families there, kids. Your children wouldn't be alone all day. There'd be other women, folks to help out. Nora's heart was beating faster now, that dangerous thing called hope starting to flutter in her chest. Why would they hire me? Because they need workers, and you need work. It's that simple. He paused. I know the foreman. Good man named Dutch Holloway. I could put in a word for you if you want. You'd do that? For us? Why? Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a moment Nora saw something raw in his expression, something painful and old. Let's just say I know what it's like to lose people to this land, and I know what it's like to wish someone had stepped in to help. He met her eyes. Let me help. Nora's throat was so tight she could barely speak. I can't. You can, Caleb said firmly. And you will, for them. He gestured to Samuel and Emma, who were watching this exchange with confused hope in their eyes. But Sweetwater Junction is still hours away, and then another 20 miles. Not the way I'm going. There's a shortcut if you know where to look. And my horse can carry all three of you if we take it slow. He held up a hand when Nora started to protest. I'm heading that direction anyway. Herd won't reach Sweetwater until tomorrow night at the earliest. I've got time. I can't ask you to… You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. Nora looked down at her children, at their thin faces and hopeful eyes, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. What was pride worth really? Less than their lives, less than this chance, however slim, to keep them together. All right, she whispered. All right. Yes. Thank you. Caleb nodded once, decisive. We should get moving then. We can make it to Eagle Bend by nightfall if we don't waste daylight. He helped them prepare for the journey, fashioned a sort of nest on his horse's back where the children could ride safely, made sure Nora was secure behind them. The stallion, a beautiful chestnut with a white star on his forehead, stood patient and calm through all the adjustments. His name's Red, Caleb said, patting the horse's neck. He's carried heavier loads over harder ground. He'll get us there. They set off as the sun continued its descent, casting long shadows across the plains. Caleb walked beside Red, leading him carefully over the rough ground, heading not west toward Sweetwater Junction but northwest, toward whatever shortcut he'd mentioned. Emma dozed against Nora's chest, exhausted from the heat and the excitement. Samuel tried to stay awake, his eyes wide as he took in this unexpected adventure, but eventually he too succumbed to sleep, his head nodding against Nora's shoulder. As they traveled, Caleb told her about Eagle Bend Ranch, how it was one of the largest spreads in the territory, how the owners were a family called the Brennans who'd come west from Montana 10 years ago and built an empire in cattle. He described the bunkhouses and the main house, The creek that still ran year-round even in this drought, the community that had formed around the ranch. "It's not easy work," he said honestly. "Long hours, and Mrs. Brennan runs a tight operation, but it's honest work, and they treat their people fair. You'd have a roof over your head and food in your bellies. That's more than most can say these days." "It sounds like heaven," Nora said quietly. Caleb glanced back at her, and in the fading light, his expression was soft. "It's not heaven, but it's a chance. Sometimes that's all we get, a chance to start over, to build something new from the ashes of what we lost." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip of Red's hooves and the whisper of wind through the dry grass. The landscape began to change subtly, the flat plains giving way to gentle rolls, the occasional cluster of scrub pine appearing on hillsides. And in the distance, if Nora squinted, she thought she could see a darker line on the horizon that might be trees. Real trees, not dead ones. "Tell me about your husband," Caleb said suddenly. "If you want to talk about him." Nora was surprised by the request, but she found that she did want to talk about Thomas. Wanted to speak his name out loud, to make him real again for a few moments. "He was a dreamer," she said. "Always believed things would work out, that good things were just around the corner. When we first came out here, he was so excited. He'd talk about the farm we'd build, the herd we'd raise. He could see it all so clearly, the house we'd expand room by room as the children grew, the orchards we'd plant. He made me believe in it too." "Sounds like a good man." "He was. He worked so hard trying to make his dreams come true. Even when the drought hit, even when everything started dying, he kept working, kept believing. I think," her voice cracked, "I think it killed him, that belief. He worked himself to death trying to save something that couldn't be saved. That wasn't his fault, or yours. Wasn't it?" Nora asked bitterly. "We should have left earlier, when we still had resources. But he was so sure, and I believed him, and now he's dead and we're destitute, and I was about to give away our children." "But you didn't," Caleb said firmly. "You didn't give up. You were trying to save them the only way you knew how. That's not weakness, Mrs. Hale. That's love." Tears were streaming down Nora's face now, silent and hot. "It doesn't feel like love. It feels like failure." "It's not." Caleb stopped walking and turned to look up at her, his expression intense. "Listen to me. I've seen a lot of folks out here break under the weight of this land. I've seen men drink themselves to death, seen women lose their minds, seen children go feral because their parents gave up. You didn't give up. You're still fighting. That matters." "I don't feel like I'm fighting. I feel like I'm drowning." "Then let someone throw you a rope. Let me help you." The sun had set completely now, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Thousands of them, more than Nora had ever seen back east, a river of light stretching across the heavens. By their faint glow, she could see Caleb's face, could see the sincerity there, and something else, something that looked like understanding born from his own pain. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked softly. "You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. "I had a sister once, Annie. She was about Emma's age when the drought hit Kansas back in '60. My folks had a farm there, small place, but it was ours. The drought killed the crops, then it killed the livestock, then—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "My sister died of fever. Probably would have survived if she'd been stronger, if we'd had more food, better medicine. But we didn't, and she didn't make it. I'm so sorry. My parents never recovered. They split up after, went their separate ways. I was 17, old enough to make my own way, so I headed west. Been drifting ever since, working cattle drives, never staying anywhere too long." He looked up at the stars. "But every time I see a woman with kids who look like they're about to break, I think about my mother, about how she needed help and didn't get it, about how maybe, if someone had stepped in, had offered her a hand." He shook his head. "Can't change the past. But I can help you, and maybe that counts for something." Nora's heart ached for him, for that 17-year-old boy who'd lost his sister, and his family, and his home all at once. "It counts for everything," she whispered. They traveled through the darkness, guided by starlight and Caleb's knowledge of the land. True to his word, he found a shortcut, a narrow trail that wound through a series of shallow canyons, following a dry creek bed that might have been beautiful when it had water, but was now just another testament to the drought's power. Around midnight, they stopped to rest. Caleb made a small fire. Just enough to keep the night chill off, he explained, and gave them more jerky and water from his seemingly bottomless supplies. The children woke briefly to eat, then fell back asleep on a blanket Caleb spread for them. You should rest too, he told Nora. We'll reach Eagle Bend by morning if we leave before dawn. I don't think I can sleep, Nora admitted. Her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. What if the ranch wouldn't hire her? What if she failed at whatever job they gave her? What if this was just delaying the inevitable? Try anyway. You'll need your strength. But Caleb didn't sleep either. He sat across the fire from her, keeping watch, occasionally adding a stick to the flames. In the flickering light, Nora studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for danger even here in the middle of nowhere. He had the look of a man who'd lived rough and learned to be careful, who'd seen enough hardship to make him cautious, but not cruel. Can I ask you something? Nora said after a while. Caleb glanced at her. Sure. Do you ever stop? Drifting, I mean. Do you ever think about settling down, staying in one place? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, Sometimes. But every time I think about it, I remember that farms fail and people die and nothing lasts. Easier to keep moving. That sounds lonely. It is, he admitted, but it's safe. Can't lose what you never have. Can't gain anything either. Caleb's eyes met hers across the fire, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, of two souls who'd both been damaged by this harsh land in different ways. Him by leaving everything behind, her by holding on too long. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe I've been wrong all these years, thinking that moving was the answer. Maybe the answer is finding something worth staying for. The moment stretched between them, electric and fragile, and then Emma murmured in her sleep and the spell was broken. Caleb looked away first, adding another stick to the fire. You should really try to sleep, he said again. Big day tomorrow. This time, Nora lay down beside her children, pulling them close, feeling their warm bodies against hers. They were alive. They were together. And tomorrow, maybe, just maybe, things would be better. She didn't think she'd be able to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under within minutes. Her last conscious thought was that for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. And somewhere nearby, Caleb Vance sat watch through the night, a cowboy who'd spent 10 years running from pain, wondering if he'd finally found a reason to stop. Dawn broke over the Wyoming plains in shades of gold and rose, painting the landscape with colors that almost made it look gentle. Almost. Nora woke to the sound of Caleb moving around their small camp, packing up their meager supplies with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. The fire had been reduced to cold ashes, and the air carried a pre-dawn chill that would burn away within the hour. Emma was still sleeping, curled against Nora's side like a small, trusting animal. Samuel's eyes were open, watching Caleb with the intense curiosity children have when they encounter someone new and interesting. Morning, Caleb said softly when he noticed Nora was awake. We should get moving soon if we want to reach Eagle Bend before the heat sets in. Nora sat up carefully, trying not to wake Emma. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and her dress was covered in dust, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that her children had made it through another night, and ahead of them lay possibility instead of despair. How far? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. 3, maybe 4 hours if we keep a steady pace. The terrain gets better from here. There's actually some grass in the valleys once we get closer to Eagle Bend Creek. The promise of grass, of water, of life seemed almost impossible after months of watching everything die. Nora helped Emma wake gently, smoothing the tangled blonde curls back from her daughter's face. The little girl's eyes were clear this morning, the dangerous flush gone from her cheeks. The water and food had helped. Caleb offered them more jerky and the last of his canteen for breakfast. We'll fill up at the creek once we get there, he said. Best water in the territory. Comes down from the mountains, stays cold even in August. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, following Caleb's lead through terrain that was still harsh but beginning to show signs of life. Small patches of scrub brush clung to rocky outcroppings, and in the distance Nora could see what looked like actual trees, cottonwoods and willows that suggested water somewhere nearby. The children rode on Red again, but this time they were more alert, looking around with interest as the landscape changed. Samuel pointed out a hawk circling overhead, and Emma gasped with delight when they startled a jackrabbit from its hiding place in the sage. "Is the ranch very big?" Samuel asked Caleb, who was walking beside the horse as before, one hand resting lightly on Red's neck. "Biggest in 3 counties," Caleb replied. "Old man Brennan, that's Mr. Brennan, the owner. He started with nothing but a dream and 500 head of cattle back in '63. Now he's running close to 5,000 head, got a dozen hands working year-round, more during branding season." 5,000 cows? Samuel's eyes went wide. "That's more than I can count. It's a powerful lot of cattle, that's for sure. Takes a lot of folks to manage an operation like that. Cowboys for the herding, of course, but also cooks and cleaners and folks to manage the house and tend the garden and look after the chickens. It's like a little town, really, all working together." "Will there be other children?" Emma asked shyly. "Several families live on the ranch. Last I heard, there were at least 6 or 7 kids around your ages. Mrs. Brennan even brought in a teacher last year to give lessons in the winter when the work slows down." Nora felt hope flutter stronger in her chest. A teacher, other children, the possibility of something that looked like a normal life, or at least as normal as life could be after everything they'd lost. As they traveled, the land continued to transform around them. The dead, flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper. They crossed dry washes that showed evidence of water during wetter seasons, smooth stones and sand deposits that spoke of streams that might flow again someday. And always in the distance, growing closer, was that line of green that marked Eagle Bend Creek. Around mid-morning, they crested a rise, and Nora got her first real look at their destination. The valley below spread out in shades of green and brown, and cutting through it like a silver ribbon was the creek Caleb had promised. Along its banks, trees grew thick and genuine, real trees with actual leaves that rustled in the breeze. And beyond the creek, she could see buildings, a large ranch house painted white, several barns and outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, cattle dotting the hillsides. "There it is," Caleb said quietly. "Eagle Bend Ranch." It looked like a mirage, like something that couldn't possibly be real after the desolation they'd left behind. Nora felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She couldn't afford to break down now, not when they were so close. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's survival," Caleb corrected gently. "The Brennans were smart. They settled where the water was and built everything around protecting that water source. While other ranches dried up and died, Eagle Bend kept going." They descended into the valley, following a well-worn trail that led toward the ranch buildings. As they got closer, Nora could see people moving about, ranch hands leading horses, women hanging laundry on lines stretched between posts, children playing near one of the smaller houses. Normal life. Ordinary, beautiful, impossible normal life. A man emerged from the largest barn as they approached, wiping his hands on his pants. He was in his 50s, Nora guessed, with iron gray hair and a weathered face that had seen a lot of sun and probably a lot of hard winters too. But his expression was open and friendly as he raised a hand in greeting. "Caleb Vance! Didn't expect to see you for another few days at least." "Dutch," Caleb nodded respectfully. "Rode ahead to scout. Found some folks who needed help along the way." Dutch Holloway, the foreman Caleb had mentioned, looked at Nora and the children with eyes that were sharp but not unkind. He'd been around long enough to recognize desperation when he saw it, and Nora was certain they looked exactly like what they were, refugees from failed dreams, holding on by their fingernails. "Ma'am," Dutch said, touching his hat. "Children, welcome to Eagle Bend." Caleb helped Nora dismount, then lifted the children down carefully. Nora's legs were unsteady after hours on horseback, but she forced herself to stand straight. to meet Dutch's eyes with as much dignity as she could muster. "Mr. Holloway, my name is Nora Hale. These are my children, Samuel and Emma. My husband passed 2 weeks ago, and our homestead." She faltered, unsure how to explain the totality of their loss without breaking down completely. "The drought took everything," Caleb filled in quietly. "Mrs. Hale needs work and her children need a place to be safe. I told her you might have something available." Dutch studied Nora for a long moment, and she forced herself not to look away, not to fidget, not to beg. Whatever he saw on her face must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "We can always use good workers. What kind of experience you have, Mrs. Hale?" "I've managed a household, sir. I can cook and clean and sew. I've tended chickens and a garden, though." She gestured helplessly at the children, at herself, at their obvious poverty. "I've never worked for wages before. I was a farmer's wife. But I'm willing to learn whatever you need me to do, and I promise I'll work hard." "I don't doubt that, ma'am. Anybody who survived what you've survived knows how to work." Dutch glanced at Caleb. "You vouch for her?" "I do." "That's good enough for me." Dutch turned back to Nora. "Here's what I can offer. We need help in the main house. Mrs. Brennan's getting on in years and could use assistance with the cooking and cleaning. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board. There's a small cabin behind the main house that's empty right now. It's not fancy, but it's got a good roof and a stove that works. Your children would be welcome to stay with you, and they'd be free to play with the other ranch kids when you're working. $20 a month, room and board, a cabin. It wasn't much by some standards, but to Nora it sounded like a fortune. It sounded like salvation. "I accept," she said quickly before he could change his mind. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. You won't regret this." "I'm sure I won't. Now, let's get you settled in and introduced to Mrs. Brennan. She'll want to meet you before—" "Dutch Holloway, are you conducting business without me again?" The voice came from the direction of the main house, sharp and authoritative, but not entirely unfriendly. Nora turned to see a woman approaching, tall and angular, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple dress covered by a work apron, and she moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been managing a large household for decades. "Mrs. Brennan, ma'am," Dutch said, and Nora noticed his tone was respectful, almost deferential. "I was just about to bring Mrs. Hale to meet you." Margaret Brennan, for that was clearly who this was, stopped a few feet away and subjected Nora to the same thorough examination Dutch had given her, though perhaps with a bit more scrutiny. Her gaze moved from Nora's dusty dress to the children clinging to her skirts to Caleb standing nearby with his hat in his hands. "Caleb Vance," Mrs. Brennan said. "I thought you were bringing cattle, not strays." "Found them on the road, ma'am. Mrs. Hale here needs work, and I thought you might need help with the house." "And what makes you think I need help?" "Because you mentioned it last time I was through, when you were complaining about how your back was giving you trouble and the house was getting to be too much for one woman to manage alone." Mrs. Brennan's lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile Nora had seen from her. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my domestic affairs, young man." "No, ma'am, you didn't, but I'm offering one anyway." For a moment the two stared at each other in what looked like a battle of wills. Then Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly, and she turned her attention fully to Nora. "Your husband?" she asked bluntly. "Dead, ma'am, 2 weeks ago." "The drought?" "Yes, ma'am." "Children's ages?" "Samuel is 7, Emma is 4. Mrs. Brennan nodded slowly, her eyes moving over the children with something that might have been sympathy, though her expression remained stern. "They look half-starved." "Yes, ma'am." There was no point in denying it. "Can you cook?" "Yes, ma'am." "Clean?" "Yes, ma'am." "Follow instructions without arguing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Work long hours without complaining?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Brennan was quiet for a moment, then she sighed, a long, weary sound that spoke of years of hard work and harder choices. "All right. God knows I could use the help, and those babies need feeding. You'll assist me with the household duties, cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever needs doing. The work starts at 5 in the morning and ends when it's done, which sometimes isn't until 8 or 9 at night. You'll get Sundays off unless there's special circumstances. The cabin Dutch mentioned is yours, and you'll take your meals in the main house kitchen. Any questions? No, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. See that you don't. I don't tolerate laziness or sass, but if you work hard and honest, we'll get along fine. Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly as she looked at the children. You two hungry? Samuel and Emma nodded shyly. Come on then. Can't have children going hungry on my ranch. Dutch, show Mrs. Hale to the cabin after I've fed these babies. Caleb, you're welcome to stay for a meal before you head out again. She turned and headed back toward the house, clearly expecting everyone to follow. Nora hesitated for just a moment, then took her children's hands and walked after her, feeling like she was stepping from one world into another, from death into life, from despair into possibility. The main house was larger inside than it had looked from outside, with a spacious kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee and other good things Nora had almost forgotten existed. Mrs. Brennan moved around the space with practiced efficiency, assembling plates of food for the children, thick slices of bread with butter and jam, cold chicken, fresh carrots from a garden that was obviously well tended and well watered. Samuel and Emma ate slowly at first, as if they couldn't quite believe the food was real, but then hunger overcame caution, and they devoured everything put in front of them. Mrs. Brennan watched them with an expression that might have been approval, though with her it was hard to tell. When did they eat last? She asked Nora quietly. Yesterday. Caleb shared his supplies with us on the road. Before that? 2 days? Maybe 3? Nora's voice was barely a whisper. I was rationing what little we had. Mrs. Brennan nodded, not judging, just acknowledging. Well, they won't go hungry here. No child goes hungry on my watch. She poured coffee for the adults, real coffee, strong and hot and perfect, and cut thick slices of bread for them too. Nora ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, though it was delicious, her eyes fixed on her children as they filled their bellies for the first time in days. Across the table, Caleb caught her eye and smiled slightly, and Nora felt something shift in her chest. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something that felt dangerous and wonderful at the same time. After the meal, Dutch took them to see the cabin. It was small, just 2 rooms really, one for living and cooking, one for sleeping. But it was clean and solid, with real glass in the windows and a wood stove that looked like it actually worked. After the collapsing wreck they'd left behind, it looked like a palace. Stove draws good, Dutch said, demonstrating. And there's a well just outside that's never gone dry. You'll share it with the Johnsons next door. They've got 3 kids, all close in age to yours. Good folks. It's perfect, Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank Caleb. He's the one who brought you here. Dutch nodded to them both and headed back toward the main house, leaving Nora and Caleb standing in the doorway of her new home. The children had already claimed the sleeping room, exclaiming over the real beds, 2 of them with actual mattresses and quilts, and Nora could hear them bouncing experimentally on the springs, their laughter like music she'd thought she'd never hear again. I don't know how to thank you, Nora said to Caleb. You've given us our lives back. You would have found a way. You're stronger than you think. I was about to give my children to strangers. You were trying to save them the only way you knew how. That's not weakness, Nora. That's love. He said her name naturally, as if they were old friends instead of people who'd met less than a day ago, and somehow it felt right. Still, what you did, her voice broke. I'll never forget it. Never. Caleb shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just glad I could help. And hey, it worked out well for everyone. You get a job and a home, the Brennans get a good worker, and I get to feel like I did something worthwhile for once. You do worthwhile things all the time, I'm sure. Moving cattle from one place to another, not exactly saving the world. He smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. But this, helping you and those kids, maybe this counts for something. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, and Nora realized she didn't want him to leave. This man who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray, who'd shown her and her children more kindness in one day than they'd received in months. She wanted him to stay, wanted to know him better, wanted to understand what had shaped him into someone who would help strangers without expectation of reward. How long will you be gone? She asked. With the cattle drive? Hard to say. We're taking the herd up to Montana, to the railhead at Miles City. If everything goes smooth, maybe 6 weeks. If we hit weather or trouble, could be longer. 6 weeks. It seemed like an eternity. Will you? Nora hesitated, suddenly shy. Will you come back this way? After? Caleb's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, recognition of the connection that had formed so quickly, so unexpectedly. I think I will, he said softly. If that's all right with you. I'd like that. The children would too. They've taken quite a shine to you. Just the children? The question was gentle, almost teasing, but underneath it was something serious, something real. Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. No, she admitted, not just the children. Caleb smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger, less burdened. Good. That's real good. They were interrupted by Samuel running out of the cabin, his face alight with excitement. Mama, there's a window in the bedroom, a real glass window, and the beds are so soft. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Nora ruffled his hair affectionately. Why don't you and Emma unpack our things while I talk to Mr. Vance? Can Mr. Vance come see our room? I'm sure he has things he needs to do, Samuel. Actually, Caleb said, I'd be honored to see your room, if that's all right. Samuel grabbed his hand and pulled him inside, chattering excitedly about the beds and the window and how there was even a rug on the floor. Emma joined them, equally enthusiastic, and Nora followed behind, watching as this rough cowboy crouched down to their level and listened to their excited babbling with genuine interest and patience. He would make a good father, she thought, then immediately felt guilty. Thomas had only been gone 2 weeks. She had no business thinking about other men, especially not with that kind of speculation. But watching Caleb with her children, seeing how gentle he was, how kind, it was impossible not to notice, not to appreciate, not to wonder. Eventually, Caleb stood up and told the children he needed to get back to the ranch. Gotta help Dutch with some things before I head out to meet the herd, but I'll see you all when I get back, all right? Promise? Emma asked, her small hand clutching his. Promise, Caleb said solemnly. Cross my heart. Nora walked him back outside, suddenly reluctant to let him go. The sun was high now, turning the valley into a patchwork of light and shadow, and somewhere in the distance she could hear cattle lowing and the sound of men working. Normal sounds, life sounds. Thank you, she said again, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. For everything. Take care of yourself, Nora, and those kids. Caleb mounted Red in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle like he was born there. I'll be back before you know it. Be safe out there. Always am. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then turned Red toward the main barn where Dutch was waiting. Nora stood watching until he disappeared from view, then turned back to her cabin, her home, and her children who were finally safe. The weight that had been crushing her for weeks lifted slightly, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she could breathe. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Brennan put Nora to work immediately, showing her where everything was in the main house, explaining how things were done, setting expectations with the kind of no-nonsense clarity that left no room for confusion. The work was indeed hard. There were meals to prepare for not just the Brennan family, but also for the ranch hands who took their meals in the bunkhouse, laundry that seemed endless, floors that needed scrubbing, bread that needed baking. But it was honest work, productive work, and Nora threw herself into it with a determination born of gratitude and relief. She wouldn't let Mrs. Brennan down. She wouldn't let her children down. She wouldn't let Caleb down, wherever he was now, riding out to meet his cattle drive. The other women on the ranch welcomed her cautiously, but kindly. Mary Johnson, who lived in the cabin next door with her husband and 3 children, brought over a pot of stew that evening and stayed to chat while the children played outside in the fading light. It's good to have another woman nearby, Mary said. She was younger than Nora, maybe 25, with red hair and freckles and a warm smile. Gets lonely sometimes with just the men around. How long have you been here? Nora asked. 3 years now. My husband works as one of the regular hands. He's good with horses, breaks them for riding. We came out from Missouri after our farm failed. Similar story to yours, I imagine. The drought? Locusts in our case. But the result was the same. Lost everything. Had to start over. Eagle Bend saved us, same as it's saving you. There was no judgment in Mary's voice, just understanding, and Nora felt some of the tension she'd been carrying ease. These people understood. They'd been where she was, had faced the same choices, the same desperation. Mrs. Brennan seems very... Nora searched for a diplomatic word. Strict? Mary laughed. She is, but she's fair, and she's got a good heart under all that starch. She and Mr. Brennan never had children of their own, which I think is why she's so particular about how things are run here. This ranch is her baby, in a way. She seems to care about the children who are here, though. Oh, she does. She might not show it much, but she makes sure every child on this ranch has enough to eat and clothes that fit and shoes for winter. Last year, when the Petersons' youngest got sick with scarlet fever, Mrs. Brennan rode all the way to Sweetwater Junction herself to fetch the doctor, then sat up 3 nights straight helping nurse that baby back to health. Nora felt her respect for her new employer grow. Beneath the stern exterior was clearly a woman who cared deeply about her people, who took her responsibilities seriously. That night, after the children were asleep in their real beds in their safe cabin, Nora sat by the window and looked out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Caleb was riding through the darkness toward his herd, and further away Thomas was buried in soil that had failed him. So much loss, so much change, all compressed into the span of a few terrible weeks. But here she was, alive. Her children safe and fed and sleeping peacefully for the first time in memory. She had a job, a home, a future that looked like something other than disaster. Thank you, she whispered to Thomas, to God, to the universe, to Caleb, to anyone who might be listening. Thank you. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but satisfying. Nora woke before dawn to help Mrs. Brennan prepare breakfast for the ranch, coffee and eggs and biscuits and bacon for the men who needed fuel for long days of hard work. Then came the cleaning, the laundry, the preparation for the midday meal, more cleaning, the evening meal, and finally, when the sun set and the last dish was washed, she was free to return to her cabin and her children. Samuel and Emma thrived in this new environment. They played with the Johnson children and the other ranch kids, their laughter ringing out across the yard. Their cheeks filled out, their eyes grew bright, and within a week they looked like different children, healthy, happy, normal. Nora herself changed too. The constant fear that had lived in her chest for months began to ease. Her hands, roughened by work, grew calloused but capable. She learned to manage the massive cast-iron stove in Mrs. Brennan's kitchen, to coordinate meals for 20 people, to organize laundry and cleaning on a scale she'd never attempted before. And gradually, carefully, she began to let herself feel something other than grief and guilt. She began to notice the beauty of the valley, the way the morning light caught on Eagle Bend Creek, the sound of birdsong in the cottonwoods. She began to laugh at the children's antics, to enjoy conversations with Mary and the other women, to feel like a person again instead of just a collection of responsibilities and sorrows. Mrs. Brennan, despite her stern demeanor, proved to be an excellent teacher. She was patient when Nora made mistakes, and there were plenty of those at first, and generous with praise when Nora got things right. After the first week, she pulled Nora aside. "You're doing good work," she said gruffly. "Keep it up." It was perhaps the highest compliment Mrs. Brennan could give, and Nora treasured it. 2 weeks after their arrival, Mr. Brennan himself appeared in the kitchen one morning. He was older than his wife, probably in his 60s, with a full white beard and eyes that were shrewd but kind. He'd been away checking on the cattle in the north pastures and hadn't been present when Nora arrived. "So you're Mrs. Hale," he said, looking her over with interest. "Caleb vouched for you, Margaret says." "Yes, sir." "Caleb Vance is a good man. Known him for years. If he says you're worth hiring, that's good enough for me." Mr. Brennan accepted the coffee Mrs. Brennan poured for him with a nod of thanks. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, sir. Everyone's been very kind." "That's what I like to hear. We try to run a good operation here, Mrs. Hale. Fair wages, honest work, and we take care of our people. You have any problems, any concerns, you come to me or Margaret. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." He nodded and took his coffee outside, leaving Nora slightly dazed. She'd been worried about meeting the owner. worried he might reconsider Dutch's decision to hire her, but instead he'd welcomed her, validated her place here. "Don't let him fool you with all that gruff talk," Mrs. Brennan said, with something that might have been affection in her voice. "He's soft as butter inside. Probably would have given you the job even if you couldn't cook a lick, just because you have children who need help." "You're both very kind." "We're practical," Mrs. Brennan corrected. "This land is hard, and surviving it takes everyone working together. That's what we've built here, a community. You're part of that now." Part of a community. Nora hadn't realized how much she'd missed that, how isolated she and Thomas had become on their failing homestead, too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit defeat until it was almost too late. The third week brought a letter from Caleb. It was delivered by a rider passing through from the north, and Nora's heart jumped when Dutch handed it to her during the midday meal. "Caleb asked me to make sure you got this," Dutch said with a knowing smile. "Said it was important." Nora waited until that evening when the children were asleep and she had a moment of privacy before opening it. The handwriting was rough but legible, the words economical but warm. "Mrs. Hale," it began, formal even though they'd parted on first-name terms. "I hope this letter finds you and the children well settled at Eagle Bend. The drive is going smooth so far, though we had some trouble with wolves 2 nights ago. Lost a calf, but saved the rest. Weather has been cooperative, which is a mercy. We should make Montana in good time. I find myself thinking about you and Samuel and Emma often, hoping you're doing all right, hoping the work isn't too hard. Dutch wrote to say you're fitting in well, which pleases me more than I can say. I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that helping you was the best thing I've done in a long time. Maybe the best thing I've ever done. I'm looking forward to seeing you again when I get back. Until then, take care. Yours, Caleb Vance." Nora read the letter 3 times, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The formality of the opening contrasted with the warmth of the content, and that last word, yours, made her feel things she had no business feeling. She wrote back immediately, describing their life at the ranch, the children's happiness, her gratitude for everything he'd done. She kept it proper, appropriate, but she ended with, "We miss you and look forward to your return." It was forward, perhaps too forward for a widow of barely a month, but Nora was tired of pretending she didn't feel what she felt. Life was too short, too uncertain. Thomas would have understood. Thomas, who'd loved boldly and dreamed big and taken chances, would have wanted her to be happy, to find joy again, to live. The letters became regular after that, one every week or so, carried by riders or mail coaches or anyone heading in the right direction. Caleb wrote about the drive, about the men he worked with, about the land they traveled through. Nora wrote about the ranch, about the children's adventures, about the satisfaction of hard work well done. And gradually, carefully, they wrote about other things too, their hopes, their fears, their pasts. Caleb wrote about his sister, about the family he'd lost, about the loneliness of drifting. Nora wrote about Thomas, about the grief that was slowly becoming something she could carry instead of something that crushed her, about the guilt of finding happiness again so soon after loss. "It's not a betrayal to live," Caleb wrote in one letter. "Your husband would want you to be happy. I never met him, but any man who loved you enough to build you a life, even if it failed, was a man who wanted the best for you. Honor his memory by living well." The words gave Nora permission to feel what she was feeling, to acknowledge the growing attachment between her and this cowboy who'd saved her family. It wasn't love, not yet. It was too soon for that, too complicated. But it was something real and warm and worth nurturing. 5 weeks after Caleb left, a late summer storm rolled through the valley. It wasn't much as storms go, just thunder and lightning and an hour of hard rain, but it was the first significant precipitation the region had seen in months. Nora stood in the doorway of her cabin with her children pressed against her sides, watching the rain hammer down, breathing in the smell of wet earth, and feeling something like joy. "Papa would have loved this," Samuel said softly. "Yes," Nora agreed, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "Yes, he would have. But she was thinking of Caleb too, wondering if the rain was falling wherever he was, hoping it meant the drought was finally breaking, hoping it meant better times ahead for everyone who'd survived this terrible year. The next morning dawned clear and clean, the world washed fresh. And that afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, leading a massive herd of cattle toward Eagle Bend Ranch. The drive had returned early. Caleb was coming home. Nora was kneading bread dough in the main house kitchen when she heard the commotion outside. The steady rhythm of her hands faltered as shouts rang out across the ranch yard, followed by the unmistakable sound of cattle lowing and hooves thundering against packed earth. Mrs. Brennan looked up from the vegetables she was chopping, her expression sharp with interest. "Sounds like the drive's back," she said. "They're early. Must have made good time." Nora's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, trying to appear calm, even as everything inside her lurched toward the windows. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since she'd seen Caleb's face, heard his voice in person rather than through carefully written words on paper. 6 weeks of wondering if what she felt was real or just gratitude magnified by loneliness. "Go on," Mrs. Brennan said, not unkindly. "Take a few minutes. The bread can wait." "I shouldn't." "Nora Hale, I've been watching you check that horizon every day for the past week, like a sailor's wife waiting for a ship. Go see if your cowboy made it back in one piece. Just don't take too long about it." Heat flooded Nora's cheeks at the knowing look in Mrs. Brennan's eyes, but she didn't deny it. There was no point. Everyone on the ranch had noticed the letters, the way Nora's face lit up when they arrived, the care with which she composed her responses. Privacy was impossible in a place like this, where everyone knew everyone else's business. She stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. The scene before her was controlled chaos, hundreds of cattle streaming into the holding pens, cowboys on horseback working in practiced coordination to guide the herd, dust rising in great clouds that turned the air hazy and golden. Through it all, she searched for one particular rider, one familiar silhouette. "Mama!" Samuel came running from the direction of the corrals, his face flushed with excitement. Emma was close behind him, both children moving faster than Nora had seen them move in weeks. "Mama, the cattle are here. There must be 1,000 of them." "More like 2,000, Nora corrected absently, still scanning the riders. "Stay back from the pens, both of you. It's dangerous." "We know, Mama. Mr. Dutch already told us." Samuel bounced on his toes, practically vibrating with energy. "Do you think Mr. Caleb came back with them?" "I don't know, sweetheart." But she did know. She could feel it somehow, that awareness of his presence, like a compass needle finding true north. And then she saw him, tall in the saddle on red, his hat pushed back as he directed other riders, his voice carrying across the yard with calm authority. He'd lost weight, she noticed. His face was leaner, more weathered, and there was a healing cut across his left cheekbone that hadn't been mentioned in his letters. But he was here, whole and safe, and the relief that flooded through her was almost overwhelming. As if sensing her gaze, Caleb turned his head. Even across the distance, even through the dust and confusion, their eyes met and held. Something passed between them in that moment, recognition, joy, something deeper that neither of them had quite put words to yet. Caleb's face broke into a smile, genuine and unguarded, and Nora found herself smiling back with equal warmth. He said something to the rider next to him, handed off whatever task he'd been managing, and guided Red toward the main house. The children started forward, but Nora caught their shoulders gently. "Let him finish his work first," she said. "He'll come see us when he's ready." But Caleb had other ideas. He swung down from Red while the horse was still moving, landing with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback, and walked straight toward them. He was dusty from crown to boot, his clothes stained with trail dirt and sweat, but his eyes were bright, and his smile hadn't faded. "Mrs. Hale," he said, and the formality of the address couldn't hide the warmth in his voice. "Samuel, Emma, it's mighty good to see you all." "Mr. Caleb!" Emma launched herself at him without hesitation, and he caught her easily, swinging her up despite his obvious fatigue. "Look at you," he said, examining her with exaggerated seriousness. "You've grown at least 3 inches since I left. And Samuel—" He set Emma down and offered Samuel his hand man to man. "You must be 4 feet tall by now." "Not quite," Samuel said proudly, shaking Caleb's hand with grave formality. "But Mama says I'm growing like a weed." "That's good. That's real good." Caleb's eyes moved to Nora, and she saw the question there, the concern. "And how are you, ma'am? Letters said you were doing well, but I wanted to see for myself." "I'm well," Nora said, and it was true. She was well. Better than she'd been in months, maybe years. The constant work had put color in her cheeks and strength in her arms. The regular meals and the security of knowing where their next food would come from had erased the hollow, desperate look she'd worn on that dusty road. "We're all well, thanks to you." "Thanks to you," Caleb corrected gently. "I just pointed the way. You're the one who did the walking." They stood there for a moment, smiling at each other like fools while the children chattered about everything that had happened during Caleb's absence. Dutch Holloway's voice cut through the moment, calling Caleb back to help with the cattle. But before he left, Caleb leaned close enough that only Nora could hear. "Can I call on you this evening, after I get cleaned up?" "Yes," Nora said, not hesitating, not playing coy. "Yes, I'd like that." "Good." His smile widened. "That's real good." He touched his hat to her and jogged back toward the corrals, leaving Nora standing on the porch with her children and her racing heart. Mrs. Brennan's voice drifted from inside. "Is he in one piece?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then get back in here. This bread won't need itself, and we've got 20 hungry cowboys who'll want feeding once they finish with those cattle." Nora returned to her work, but her thoughts were scattered, jumping ahead to the evening, to whatever conversation she and Caleb would have. 6 weeks of letters had built something between them, but letters were safe, distant. Face-to-face conversation was different, more immediate, more dangerous, more real. The afternoon passed in a blur of cooking and serving. The returning drovers were fed in shifts, tramping into the bunkhouse dining area in groups of 5 or 6, their faces showing the wear of weeks on the trail. They were polite to Nora, touching their hats and thanking her for the food, but their eyes were tired and their movements slow. Trail driving was brutal work, she knew, pushing cattle across hundreds of miles of open country while dealing with weather, predators, and the constant risk of stampede. By the time the last cowboy had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, the sun was setting in shades of orange and pink that painted the valley in colors that seemed almost unreal. Nora returned to her cabin to find Mary Johnson sitting on the front step with Emma in her lap, telling the little girl a story while Samuel played with the Johnson children nearby. "Thought you might need a few minutes to yourself," Mary said with a knowing grin. "Heard Caleb Vance is back." "News travels fast. Honey, on a ranch like this, news travels at the speed of light, and everyone knows he's sweet on you." Mary stood, settling Emma on her feet. "I'll keep the children for a bit if you want. Give you time to tidy up." Nora wanted to protest, to say there was nothing between her and Caleb that required privacy or preparation, but the words stuck in her throat. Because there was something, wasn't there? Something that had been building through letters and stolen glances and the memory of a kind act on a dusty road. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate it. Take your time. The kids are having fun, and Lord knows I could use the adult conversation later." Mary winked and herded all 5 children toward her cabin, leaving Nora alone. Inside, Nora caught sight of herself in the small mirror that hung above the wash basin. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the day's work, wisps of dark brown framing her face. Her dress was clean but plain, and there were shadows under her eyes from long days of labor. She looked older than her 28 years, worn down by grief and hardship and too many choices that had felt impossible. But there was something else in her reflection, too. A light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A softness to her expression that spoke of healing. She was coming back to herself, slowly but surely, and the woman looking back at her was someone she might actually like to know. She washed her face and hands, changed into her better dress, still nothing fancy, but at least it wasn't stained with kitchen work, and had just finished pinning her hair properly when a knock came at the door. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Come in," she called, then wondered if that was too forward. Should she have made him wait outside? But this was the frontier, not a Boston drawing room, and different rules applied. The door opened and Caleb stepped inside, and Nora's breath caught. He'd cleaned up thoroughly. His hair was still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved, and he wore a clean shirt that was probably his best. He held his hat in his hands and looked uncertain in a way she'd never seen him before. like a man walking into territory he didn't quite understand. "Evening," he said. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Please, sit." She gestured to one of the two chairs at the small table, then busied herself making coffee to give her hands something to do. "How was the drive?" "Long, but successful. Got the herd to Miles City with minimal losses, got paid fair, and made it back without incident. Can't ask for much more than that." "You have a cut on your face." The words came out before Nora could stop them, more intimate than she'd intended. Caleb's hand went to his cheekbone reflexively. "Had a run-in with a low branch one night when I was chasing down a stray. Nothing serious." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." His eyes were soft on her face. "Nora, I got your letters," she interrupted, then felt foolish. Of course he knew she'd gotten his letters. She'd responded to every single one. "I mean, they meant a great deal to me. All of them. They meant a lot to me too, writing to you, knowing you were here, safe." He paused, seeming to search for words. "It gave me something to look forward to, someone to come back to." The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. Nora poured the coffee with shaking hands and set a cup in front of him, then took the other chair, separated from him by 2 feet of table but feeling much closer than that. "Caleb, I need to say something, and I don't know quite how to say it properly. Just say it straight. I'm not a fancy man. I appreciate plain speaking." Nora took a breath. "My husband's been dead less than 2 months. By any proper standard, I should still be in mourning. I should be wearing black and avoiding male company, and definitely not feeling—" She faltered, courage failing her. "Feeling what?" Caleb asked gently. "Feeling the way I feel about you," she finished in a rush. "It's too soon. I know it's too soon. People would say I'm disrespecting Thomas's memory, that I'm being improper, that I should wait at least a year before even thinking about—" She stopped, horrified at how much she'd revealed. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cooling between his hands. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "What do you think Thomas would say? If he could speak to you now, what would he want for you?" Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "He'd want me to be happy. He'd want the children to be safe and cared for. He'd want—" Her voice broke. "He'd want me to live." "Then live," Caleb said simply. "Nora, I don't claim to know much about proper mourning periods or what society expects, but I know that life's too short and too hard to waste time on what other people think. If you feel something, and I feel something, and neither of us means any disrespect to the dead, then maybe that's enough." "Is it that simple?" "Why shouldn't it be?" He reached across the table, palm up, offering. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not asking you to forget your husband or pretend he never existed. I'm just asking if maybe we can see where this goes. Take our time. Get to know each other proper." Nora looked at his outstretched hand, calloused from years of hard work, scarred from a life lived outdoors, strong and steady and real. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared and the life they'd tried to build. She thought about her children, sleeping safe in a bed that Caleb had helped them reach. She thought about the future, about the possibility of something more than just survival. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. "I'd like that," she whispered. Caleb's fingers closed around hers, warm and gentle, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. "So would I." They sat like that for a while, hands joined across the table, not speaking, just being together in the quiet of the evening. Outside, the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night drifted through the windows, horses nickering in the corrals, men's voices calling good night to each other, the distant lowing of cattle. Normal sounds, life sounds. "Tell me about the drive," Nora said eventually. "Your letters mentioned some of it, but I want to hear it all. I want to know what you've been doing, where you've been." So Caleb told her. He talked about the long days in the saddle, about nights spent under stars so thick they looked like spilled milk across the sky. He described the river crossings, the tension of watching for wolves and rustlers, the camaraderie among the drovers who became like brothers during the weeks on the trail. He told her about Montana, about Miles City with its railroad and its rougher element, about the satisfaction of delivering the herd intact and collecting payment for a job well done. And Nora talked too, telling him things she hadn't written in the letters, about how strange it felt to be part of a community again after being so isolated, about the satisfaction of learning new skills from Mrs. Brennan, about the way the children had blossomed with regular food and companionship, about the guilt that still crept in sometimes, the feeling that she had no right to be happy when Thomas was dead. Guilt's a heavy thing to carry, Caleb said. I know something about that. Still feel guilty about my sister, about not being able to save her. But holding on to it doesn't bring them back, and it doesn't honor them either. Best we can do is live well, love hard, and try to be the kind of people they'd be proud of. Is that what you're doing? Living well? Caleb considered the question seriously. I'm trying. Spent 10 years running from everything, from pain, from connection, from the possibility of losing people I care about. But running doesn't solve anything. It just makes you tired and alone. He squeezed her hand gently. Meeting you, helping you, and the kids. It made me realize I was tired of running, made me want to find a reason to stay put for once. What if that reason disappoints you? What if it doesn't? He smiled. Nora, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm not expecting you to have it all figured out. I'm just expecting honesty, and maybe a chance, that's all. A knock at the door interrupted them, and they pulled their hands apart guiltily. Mary's voice called from outside. Nora? Children are getting sleepy. Thought you might want them back. Yes, thank you. Nora stood quickly, smoothing her dress, suddenly nervous about Mary seeing Caleb there, even though there was nothing improper about two adults having a conversation. The door opened and the children tumbled in, exhausted and happy from playing. They lit up when they saw Caleb, immediately climbing into his lap without invitation, chattering about their day. He took it in stride, listening to their excited stories with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at their jokes. Mary stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with knowing eyes. She caught Nora's gaze and winked, then left without comment, tactful in a way Nora appreciated. I should go, Caleb said eventually, gently extracting himself from the children's grasp. Let you get these two to bed. But Nora, may I call on you again? Tomorrow, maybe? I'd like that. Good. He stood, settling his hat on his head. To Samuel and Emma, he said, You two be good for your mama. Here, I'll come see you again soon. Will you teach me to ride? Samuel asked eagerly. Like a real cowboy? If your mama says it's all right, I'd be happy to. Can he, Mama? Please? Nora looked at her son's eager face, at the hope shining in his eyes, and felt her heart expand. This was what Thomas would have wanted, for their children to grow and learn and experience joy, for them to have positive male figures in their lives who could teach them and guide them. We'll see, she said, which was not a no, and Samuel whooped with excitement. After Caleb left, Nora got the children ready for bed, listening to their enthusiastic recap of the day. They loved Caleb, she realized. They'd bonded with him quickly and completely, seeing in him something they desperately needed: safety, strength, kindness. A father figure. The thought should have worried her, should have made her pull back, but instead it just felt right. Natural. Like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. That night, after the children were asleep, Nora sat by the window and watched the stars. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Caleb was probably doing the same. Thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. Planning a future that was still uncertain but felt possible in a way nothing had felt possible for a long time. The next morning brought more work. There was always more work. But Nora found herself humming as she prepared breakfast, earning a raised eyebrow from Mrs. Brennan. Someone's in a good mood. It's a beautiful morning. It's the same morning as yesterday, just with fewer cattle making noise. Mrs. Brennan set out the flour for biscuits. But I suppose when a certain cowboy comes back after 6 weeks away, mornings do tend to look prettier. Mrs. Brennan, don't Mrs. Brennan me, girl. I've got eyes. So does everyone else on this ranch. That man's been pining for you since he left, and you've been doing the same. It's too soon, Nora said quietly. Thomas has only been gone. Life doesn't wait for proper mourning periods, especially not out here. Mrs. Brennan's voice was firm, but not unkind. I've buried more people than I care to count. Friends, neighbors, people I loved. And I've learned that when something good comes along, you don't turn it away just because the timing isn't perfect. You grab hold of it, and you thank God for the blessing. But what will people say? People will say whatever they're going to say regardless of what you do. Question is, can you live with yourself if you let a good man slip away because you're worried about appearances? Nora had no answer to that, so she threw herself into her work, trying not to think about Caleb, about possibilities, about the future. But it was impossible not to notice when he appeared mid-morning, leading Red and a smaller paint horse toward the cabin area. Samuel saw him first and came running, Emma close behind. "Did you bring that horse for me?" Samuel asked breathlessly. "Not just for you," Caleb said. "Thought maybe Emma might like to learn too, and your mama, if she's interested." Nora, watching from the kitchen window, saw Samuel's face light up with pure joy. When was the last time she'd seen him look like that? Months, at least. Maybe longer. The drought and the dying and the grief had stolen so much from them, but here was Caleb, casually giving it back. Mrs. Brennan appeared at her shoulder. "Well, are you going to stand here watching, or are you going to go out there?" "I have work. Work will keep. That man and those smiles on your children's faces won't wait forever. Go on. Take an hour. I'll manage." So Nora went, untying her apron and walking out into the bright morning. Caleb looked up as she approached, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Morning," he said. "I thought maybe you'd all like to learn to ride properly. Samuel mentioned it last night, and I figured Emma might enjoy it too." "That's very thoughtful of you." "It's practical," Caleb countered. "Living on a ranch, it helps to know how to handle a horse. Besides, the paint here, her name's Clover, she's gentle as a lamb, perfect for learning." He spent the next hour teaching the children the basics: how to approach a horse, how to read its body language, how to sit in the saddle. He was patient and thorough, never rushing them, always encouraging. And when Samuel finally sat in the saddle for the first time, his small hands gripping the pommel with white-knuckled intensity, the pride on Caleb's face was unmistakable. "That's it," he said. "You're a natural, son. Just relax and let Clover do the work." Nora watched, her heart so full it ached. This was what family looked like, what happiness looked like, what the future could look like if she was brave enough to reach for it. When it was Emma's turn, Caleb lifted her into the saddle with infinite care, keeping one hand on her back to make sure she felt secure. The little girl's initial fear melted into delight as Clover took a few slow steps forward, and her laughter rang out across the yard like bells. "Your turn," Caleb said to Nora when Emma's lesson was done. "Oh, I don't need—" "Everyone needs to know how to ride. Come on. I promise I won't let you fall." So Nora found herself in the saddle for the first time in years, Caleb's hand steady on her back, his voice low and encouraging as he guided her through the basics. She felt foolish and awkward and entirely too aware of his proximity, but she also felt alive in a way she hadn't in months. The hour passed too quickly. Soon Mrs. Brennan was calling from the main house. Lunch preparations waited for no one, and Nora had to return to work. But the memory of that hour, of Caleb's patience and the children's joy, stayed with her through the afternoon. It became their pattern over the following weeks. Caleb would find time during the day to visit, teaching the children to ride, helping with small repairs around the cabin, just being present in their lives in a way that felt natural rather than forced. And in the evenings, after the children were asleep, he and Nora would sit and talk, slowly learning each other's stories, each other's hearts. He told her about his travels, about the places he'd seen, and the people he'd met during his 10 years of drifting, about the fights he'd been in, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. He was honest about his past, about drinking too much after his sister died, about the woman in Kansas he'd almost married before fear made him run, about the loneliness that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it until she came along. And Nora told him about her life before Wyoming, about growing up on the coast with the smell of salt air and the sound of gulls, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about falling in love with his optimism and his dreams, about the early years of their marriage, when everything felt possible and the future stretched out bright and limitless, about the slow erosion of hope as the drought killed everything they'd built. "Do you still love him?" Caleb asked one evening, his voice gentle. "Yes," Nora said honestly. "But it's different now. It's like he's part of my past, part of who I was, but not who I'm becoming. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." The people we've lost, they shape us, but they don't have to define us. I think he'd like you, Nora said softly. Thomas, he'd appreciate that you helped us, that you're kind to the children. He always valued kindness above just about everything else. Then he was a wise man. The ranch itself was changing too as autumn approached. The terrible drought that had gripped the territory for months was finally, slowly breaking. The rain that had fallen the week before was followed by more gentle showers, and the land responded with almost desperate eagerness. Grass appeared in the valleys, the creek ran fuller, trees that had looked dead showed new growth. It was as if the earth itself was healing, coming back to life, and Nora couldn't help but see it as a metaphor for her own journey. She too was healing, growing, becoming someone new while honoring who she'd been. 6 weeks after Caleb's return, Mr. Brennan made an announcement at dinner. The ranch needed a permanent horse trainer, someone to break and train the remuda and handle the breeding program. The pay was good, and it came with a cabin, one of the nicer ones, closer to the main house. I'm offering it to you, Caleb, Mr. Brennan said. You've got the skill and the temperament. Job's yours if you want it. The room went silent. Every eye turned to Caleb, waiting for his answer. Nora's heart hammered in her chest. A permanent position meant staying. It meant putting down roots. It meant committing to this place, these people, to her. Caleb's eyes found Nora's across the room. In them she saw the question, the uncertainty, the hope, and she smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but enough. Enough to tell him what her answer would be if he stayed. Enough to give him permission to choose the life he wanted rather than the life fear dictated. I accept, Caleb said, turning back to Mr. Brennan. Thank you, sir. I'd be honored. The room erupted in congratulations and backslapping, but Nora barely heard it. All she could see was Caleb's face, the relief and joy written there, the way his eyes kept finding hers, as if needing confirmation that this was real, that she was real, that the possibility between them was worth the risk of staying. That evening, when Caleb came to call, he found Nora sitting outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and for a long moment they just existed together in comfortable silence. I'm staying, he said finally. I know you probably figured that out, but I wanted to say it plain. I'm staying, Nora. For the job, yes, but also for you. For Samuel and Emma. For the possibility of building something real here. I'm glad, Nora whispered. I'm so glad, Caleb. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and they sat like that as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. And for the first time since Thomas died, Nora let herself imagine a future that included love, partnership, family. A future that honored the past without being trapped by it. I'm not asking for anything to happen quickly, Caleb said. I know you need time. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Waiting, hoping, building a life that could be ours if you want it. Nora turned to face him, and in the twilight his face was soft with emotion. I want it, she said. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. I want to see where this leads. I want to take the chance. That's all I needed to hear. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Nora didn't move. His lips brushed hers, gentle and tentative, a question more than a demand. She answered by leaning into the kiss, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating strong and sure. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been. It was new and different and entirely its own thing. Not better or worse, just different. The beginning of something rather than the continuation of what had been. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to court you proper, he said. Do this right. Give you time to grieve and heal and be sure. And when you're ready, if you're ready, I'm going to ask you to marry me, just so you know. So there's no confusion about my intentions. Nora laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. I appreciate the warning. Fair is fair. He stood, pulling her up with him. Now I should go before your reputation suffers any more than it probably already has. But I'll see you tomorrow? Tomorrow, Nora agreed. And the day after that. and the day after that. I'm counting on it. He kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then disappeared into the darkness toward his bunk in the ranch hand's quarters. Nora stood watching until she couldn't see him anymore, then went inside to her children, her home, her new life. The future was uncertain. There would be hard days ahead, moments of doubt, times when grief crept back in. But there would also be joy, possibility, love. She was beginning to understand that both could be true at the same time, that she could honor Thomas's memory while building something new with Caleb, that she could be both widow and woman in love, that life could be complicated and messy and absolutely worth living. Inside the cabin, Samuel and Emma were already asleep, their faces peaceful in the lamplight. Nora kissed each of them gently, then prepared for bed herself. And as she lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, she felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. Hope. Autumn settled over Eagle Bend Ranch like a gentle benediction, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. The cottonwoods along the creek turned golden, their leaves catching the slanted sunlight and transforming the landscape into something almost magical. The air carried a crisp edge in the mornings now, promising the winter to come, but for now it was perfect. Cool enough to work without drowning in sweat, warm enough that the children could still play outside until dusk. Nora had been at the ranch for 3 months now, and the rhythm of her days had become as familiar as breathing. Rise before dawn, help Mrs. Brennan prepare breakfast for the hands, clean and cook, and manage the endless demands of a working ranch. But within that structure, she'd found something she hadn't expected. Contentment. Not the wild, dreaming happiness Thomas had promised her, but something steadier, something that felt like it might actually last. And through it all, woven into every day like thread through fabric, was Caleb. He'd been true to his word about courting her properly. He called on her every evening after the children were asleep, bringing small gifts, wildflowers he'd found while riding the boundary lines, a hair ribbon he'd bought in town for Emma, a carved wooden horse he'd made for Samuel. They would sit on the porch of her cabin and talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane with equal comfort. But it was the small things that made Nora's heart swell. The way Caleb had fixed the loose board on her porch without being asked. How he always made sure there was firewood stacked by her door before the evening chill set in. The patient way he taught Samuel to ride, never losing his temper when the boy made mistakes, always encouraging him to try again. The gentle manner in which he braided Emma's hair when Nora's hands were occupied with work, his large fingers surprisingly deft with the small task. The ranch had noticed, of course. Privacy was impossible in a place where everyone lived and worked in close quarters, but the response had been largely supportive, though there were whispers. Mary Johnson was firmly in Nora's corner, defending her friend against any suggestion of impropriety. Mrs. Brennan had made her approval clear through actions, if not words, giving Nora more flexible hours, ensuring she had Sunday afternoons free to spend with Caleb and the children. Even Dutch Holloway had nodded his approval when he'd caught them walking together one evening. But not everyone was pleased. Sarah Henderson, one of the other women who worked in the main house, had made her disapproval known in subtle ways, pointed comments about proper mourning periods, observations about how quickly some women moved on from their husbands. She was older than Nora, a widow herself who'd worn black for 2 full years after her husband's death, and she clearly felt Nora's behavior reflected poorly on widowhood in general. "Some of us remember our vows," Sarah had said one morning in the kitchen, her voice pitched just loud enough for Nora to hear. "Till death do us part" means something. Mrs. Brennan had rounded on her immediately. "And after death? What then, Sarah? Should a young woman with 2 children condemn herself to loneliness because you think grief has a schedule?" "I'm just saying there's a proper way to do things." "The proper way is whatever keeps body and soul together and doesn't hurt anyone else. Nora's doing honest work, raising her children right, and conducting herself with perfect respectability. What she does with her personal life is her own business and God's, not yours." Sarah had subsided after that, but the sting of her words lingered. That evening, when Caleb came to call, Nora was quieter than usual, her mind troubled. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked after a few minutes of stilted conversation. "You seem 1,000 miles away." "Do you think we're moving too fast?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Be honest with me, Caleb. Is what we're doing wrong?" He was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the lamplight spilling from the cabin window. Wrong how? Morally? Socially? In whose eyes? In anyone's eyes. Everyone's. I don't know. Nora twisted her hands in her lap. Sarah Henderson said something today about proper mourning, about remembering vows, and it made me think, what if she's right? What if I'm disrespecting Thomas's memory? What if the children grow up thinking I didn't love their father because I moved on so quickly? Nora, look at me. Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. When she met his eyes, he continued. Samuel was 7 when his father died. Emma was 4. What do you think they'll remember more clearly when they're grown? How long you wore black, or whether they had food to eat and a safe place to sleep? But I'm not finished. You loved your husband. Anyone can see that in the way you talk about him, the way you've honored his memory. But he's gone, Nora. You're not. Your children aren't. And life doesn't stop just because we think it should. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. If someone wants to judge you for surviving, for finding happiness again, for giving your children a chance at a normal life, that says more about them than it does about you. Sarah lost her husband too. She managed alone. Did she have 2 young children to feed? Was she destitute and starving when he died? Caleb's voice was patient but pointed. Everyone's situation is different, Nora. You can't compare your path to someone else's and expect them to be the same. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. I just don't want people to think badly of him, of Thomas. He was a good man, Caleb. He tried so hard. I know he was, and I know he did. Caleb moved closer, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture of comfort rather than romance. But he would want you to be happy, wouldn't he? He would want his children taken care of. If the roles were reversed, if you died and he'd survived, would you want him to spend the rest of his life alone? The question struck home. Nora tried to imagine Thomas in her position, grieving, desperate, struggling to care for their children alone. Would she want him to refuse help? To reject the possibility of love again? To sentence himself to loneliness out of some misguided sense of loyalty to her memory? No, she whispered. I'd want him to find happiness, to give the children a mother who could love them. Then why should it be different for you? It was such a simple question, but it cut through all of Nora's guilt and confusion like a knife through butter. Why should it be different? Why should she hold herself to a standard she wouldn't impose on Thomas? Why should other people's opinions about proper mourning matter more than her own survival and happiness? I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of everything. Of moving forward. Of forgetting him. Of making another mistake. What if it's not a mistake? Caleb's voice was soft. What if this is exactly what's supposed to happen? What if I was supposed to find you on that road? Supposed to help you? Supposed to stay? You don't believe in fate. I didn't used to, but meeting you made me reconsider a lot of things I thought I knew. He pulled back slightly so he could see her face. Nora, I'm not asking you to forget Thomas. I'm not asking you to pretend he never existed. I'm just asking you to let yourself live. To let yourself be happy. Is that really so wrong? She looked into his eyes, those blue-green eyes that had become so familiar, so dear, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. No, she said. No, it's not wrong. Then stop letting other people's opinions run your life. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. That night, after Caleb left, Nora lay awake thinking about his words. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd shared and the life they'd tried to build. She thought about the moment on the road when she'd been ready to give up her children, and how Caleb had appeared like an answer to a prayer. She thought about the past 3 months, about the gradual healing of her heart, about the way love could grow even in the ashes of loss. And she realized something important. She could honor Thomas's memory and still build a future with Caleb. The two weren't mutually exclusive. Thomas would always be Samuel and Emma's father, would always be the man who'd loved her first, who'd given her the gift of her children. But Caleb could be the man who loved her second, who helped her rebuild, who gave them all a chance at happiness again. The next morning, she worked with renewed purpose, ignoring Sarah's pointed looks and whispered comments. At noon, when the hands came in for their meal, she caught Caleb's eye across the crowded dining room and smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. His face lit up in response, and several of the men noticed, exchanging knowing grins. After the meal, as Nora was clearing dishes, Mrs. Brennan pulled her aside. "I'm proud of you," the older woman said without preamble. "Ma'am, you've been walking around for weeks now looking guilty for being happy. It's good to see you finally let that go." Mrs. Brennan's stern face softened slightly. "Life's too short for unnecessary guilt, Nora. God knows we all carry enough of the necessary kind." "Thank you," Nora said, her throat tight with emotion. "For everything. For giving me this job, for defending me to Sarah, for nothing. You've earned your place here through hard work and good character. The rest is just human decency." Mrs. Brennan turned back to her work, but not before adding, "That man of yours asked Mr. Brennan's permission to marry you, you know, did it proper, old-fashioned like. Said he wanted to make sure we'd be agreeable before he asked you." Nora's heart stuttered. "When?" "Last week. Mr. Brennan gave his blessing, for what it's worth. Not that you need it, being a grown woman and all, but Caleb wanted to do things right." Mrs. Brennan glanced at her. "Thought you should know, in case he asks and you want time to think about your answer." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Nora's mind kept returning to Mrs. Brennan's revelation. Caleb was going to propose. Soon, probably. And she needed to decide what her answer would be. Her heart already knew. Her heart had known for weeks, maybe longer. But her head wanted to be cautious, to consider all the implications. Samuel and Emma adored Caleb, but how would they feel about him becoming their stepfather? Would it feel like a betrayal of Thomas? And what about her? Was she truly ready to marry again, to make those vows to another man? That evening, Mary came by after the children were asleep, carrying a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. "Heard the news," she said, settling into one of the porch chairs. "The whole ranch is talking about how Caleb asked Mr. Brennan's permission. Very romantic." "Is nothing private around here?" "Honey, you know better than that." Mary poured them each a glass. "So, what are you going to say when he asks?" "I don't know." "Liar. You know exactly what you're going to say. You're just scared to admit it." Nora accepted the wine and took a long sip. "Is it too soon, Mary? Be honest with me. Is 3 months too soon to know?" Mary was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in her glass. "My grandmother used to say that when you know, you know. Duration doesn't matter as much as certainty. She met my grandfather on a Tuesday and married him that Saturday, and they were happy together for 47 years. She smiled. "But I also think that only you can answer that question. Not me, not Mrs. Brennan, not Sarah Henderson with her judgmental comments. Only you." "I love him," Nora said quietly. "I didn't mean to, didn't plan to, but I do. Is that a betrayal of Thomas?" "Did you love Thomas?" "With all my heart." "Past tense," Mary pointed out gently. "You loved him. He's gone. That love doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of your history instead of your present. There's nothing wrong with that, Nora. It's not betrayal. It's survival." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping wine and watching the stars emerge. Finally, Mary stood to leave. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you and Caleb are good together. I think he'll be good to you and good for those children. And I think Thomas, wherever he is, would be grateful that someone's taking care of his family." After Mary left, Nora sat alone with her thoughts and her wine. She thought about the day she'd met Caleb, about the desperation that had driven her toward Sweetwater Junction with the intention of giving up her children. She thought about how he'd appeared like a miracle, offering not just immediate help, but a path toward a real future. She thought about the letters they'd exchanged, the conversations they'd shared, the slow building of trust and affection into something deeper. And she thought about love, how it could exist in multiple forms, how it could honor the past while embracing the future, how it could heal wounds she'd thought were permanent. The answer, she realized, had never really been in doubt. 3 days later, Caleb asked her to take a walk with him after dinner. They left the children in Mary's care and headed toward the creek, where the cottonwoods glowed golden in the setting sun. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of water and autumn leaves, and for a while they walked in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. Finally, Caleb stopped at a bend in the creek where the water pooled deep and clear. He turned to face her, his expression serious but not nervous. This was a man who knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. "Nora, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm done, all right? She nodded, her heart already racing. I've spent 10 years running from anything that looked like permanence. Told myself I was protecting myself from loss, from pain, from all the things that come with caring about people and places. But really, I was just scared. Scared of failing, scared of not being enough, scared of losing people the way I lost my family. He took her hands in his calloused thumbs brushing over her knuckles. Then I met you, and you were scared too, but you weren't running. You were fighting for your children, doing whatever it took to keep them safe, even when it meant breaking your own heart. That kind of courage, that kind of love, it made me realize I'd been wrong about everything. Caleb, let me finish. His smile was gentle. Meeting you, helping you, watching you build a life here, it showed me what I'd been missing all those years. Not just love, though God knows I love you more than I thought possible, but purpose, family, the kind of roots that make life worth living instead of just worth surviving. He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, Nora saw a simple gold band. Nothing fancy, but beautiful in its plainness. I know it's been less than 4 months since Thomas died. I know people will talk. I know there are 100 reasons why we should wait longer. But I also know that life's too short and too uncertain to waste time on should-haves and maybes. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand, looking up at her with those extraordinary eyes. Nora Hale, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Samuel and Emma? Will you build a life with me here at Eagle Bend and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved? Tears were streaming down Nora's face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for this second chance she'd been given. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes, Caleb. Yes, I'll marry you. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest while she cried and laughed simultaneously. When she finally pulled back enough to look at him, he was grinning like a fool, all his usual careful composure gone in favor of pure, unguarded happiness. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now that she'd given herself permission to feel them. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When? He asked when they finally broke apart. When can we get married? Soon, Nora said. As soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to wait, Caleb. I've done enough waiting. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and Nora could feel the difference in herself. Lighter, freer, as if she'd been carrying a weight she could finally set down. When they reached her cabin, the children were waiting on the porch with Mary, who took one look at their faces and started grinning. I take it congratulations are in order? We're getting married, Caleb announced, and Mary let out a whoop that probably woke half the ranch. Samuel and Emma came running over, and Caleb crouched down to their level. What do you two think about that? He asked seriously. About me marrying your mama and becoming part of your family? Samuel looked at Emma, then back at Caleb. Will you really be our papa? If you'll have me. I'll never try to replace your real father. He'll always be your papa. But I'd be honored to be your stepfather, to help raise you and love you and teach you everything I know. Can I still call you Mr. Caleb? You can call me whatever makes you comfortable, son. Emma, who'd been quiet until now, suddenly launched herself at Caleb, wrapping her small arms around his neck. I want you to be my papa, she said. Mama's happy when you're here. I like it when Mama's happy. Caleb's eyes grew suspiciously bright as he hugged the little girl back. I like it when your mama's happy too, sweetheart, and I promise I'll do everything I can to keep her that way. The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew that Caleb Vance and Nora Hale were engaged, and opinions were divided. Most of the ranch hands were supportive, slapping Caleb on the back and congratulating him on his good fortune. The other women were more mixed. Mary and a few others were thrilled, while Sarah Henderson and her allies maintained their disapproving silence. But the Brennans' response was what mattered most, and they were unequivocally supportive. Mrs. Brennan insisted on hosting the wedding at the ranch house, and Mr. Brennan offered Caleb the larger cabin he'd been promised when he took the horse training position. Can't have you and your new family cramped in that little place, Mr. Brennan said. The cabin near the west pasture is bigger, got 3 rooms. Should suit you better. That's generous of you, sir. It's practical. Happy workers are productive workers, and you're one of my best hands. Besides, Margaret's already planning the wedding, and when my wife plans something, it happens whether you're ready or not. He wasn't wrong. Mrs. Brennan threw herself into wedding preparations with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. The ceremony would be small, just the ranch community, no need for anything fancy, but it would be proper and respectable. She enlisted Mary and the other supportive women to help sew Nora a new dress, something simple but pretty in a soft blue that brought out her eyes. No white, Mrs. Brennan said firmly. You're a widow with children. Blue or gray are more appropriate. I don't care what color it is, Nora said honestly. I just want to marry him. The dress came together quickly, and when Nora tried it on for the first time, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked healthy, happy, years younger than the desperate widow who'd arrived at Eagle Bend 4 months ago. Her hair had been properly cut and styled by Mary, her face had filled out from regular meals, and her eyes held a light that had been missing for far too long. 2 weeks after the proposal, on a crisp October morning with autumn leaves drifting down like blessing, Nora Hale married Caleb Vance in the parlor of the Eagle Bend Ranch main house. Reverend Matthews came from Sweetwater Junction to perform the ceremony, the same Reverend Nora had been walking to see with the intention of giving up her children. I remember you, he said quietly before the ceremony began. You came through town with your little ones months ago, asked about work, about help. I'm glad to see how things turned out. So am I, Nora said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Samuel and Emma stood beside Nora, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces shining with excitement. Caleb wore a new shirt and looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him, his hands fidgeting with his hat until Dutch took it from him with a grin. The ranch community gathered close, everyone who'd become part of Nora's new life in this place. When Reverend Matthews asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a tense moment of silence. Nora saw Sarah Henderson open her mouth as if to speak, but Mrs. Brennan's withering glare stopped her cold. The moment passed, and the ceremony continued. Do you, Caleb Vance, take Nora Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was strong and sure, no hesitation. Do you, Nora Hale, take Caleb Vance to be your lawfully wedded husband? Nora looked at this man who'd saved her family, who'd shown her that love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd given her the courage to live again. I do. The ring Caleb slipped on her finger was the same simple gold band he'd shown her by the creek. When it was her turn, she placed a matching band on his finger, purchased with her carefully saved wages, a symbol of her commitment to this new life they were building together. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was chaste and brief, appropriate for a gathering that included children and employers, but it held a promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they pulled apart, Caleb was grinning and Nora was crying happy tears, and the assembled crowd erupted in applause. Mrs. Brennan had prepared a feast, roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, pies made from the last of the season's apples. The ranch hands played fiddle and guitar, and there was dancing in the yard despite the autumn chill. Samuel danced with Mary's eldest daughter, his face serious with concentration as he tried to remember the steps. Emma rode on Caleb's shoulders, giggling as he spun around. And Nora danced with her new husband, his arms strong around her waist, his eyes full of love. Happy? He asked as they swayed together. More than I thought possible. Good. That's all I want, to make you happy. You do, she assured him. Every day in 100 small ways you make me happy. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, Caleb and Nora said their goodnights and headed to their new home, the larger cabin Mr. Brennan had provided, which several of the hands had spent the past week preparing for them. The children ran ahead, excited to explore their new space, and Caleb and Nora followed more slowly, hand in hand. The cabin was indeed larger than what they'd had before, a main room for living and cooking, 2 bedrooms, and a small loft space above. The hands had moved their few possessions over, And some of the women had added small touches: curtains on the windows, a rag rug on the floor, wildflowers in a jar on the table. It's perfect, Nora breathed. It's home, Caleb corrected. Our home. They got the children settled in their bedroom. Samuel and Emma would share the space, at least until they got older. And then finally, they were alone in the room that would be theirs. Caleb lit the lamp, and in its soft glow, Nora saw both nervousness and anticipation in his face. I know it's been a while for you, he said quietly. Since Thomas. We can take this slow if you need to. Nora reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. I don't need slow, she said. I need you, all of you. I need to start this life right, without hesitation or fear. Nora, I love you, Caleb Vance. Now stop talking and kiss your wife. He did, and this time there was no audience, no need to hold back. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and necessary, and Nora felt herself responding with a passion she'd thought died with Thomas. But this wasn't about replacing her first husband. This was about embracing her second, about choosing life and love and the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of starting over. That night, in the darkness of their new home, they came together as husband and wife. Caleb was gentle and patient, attuned to her responses, making sure she was with him every step of the way. And Nora discovered that her body remembered joy, remembered pleasure, remembered what it meant to be wanted and cherished. When it was over and they lay tangled together in the aftermath, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. No regrets? Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. None, Nora said firmly. Not a single one. Good, because I plan on making you happy for the rest of our lives, Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance. The name felt strange and new and absolutely right. Nora Vance. A different woman from Nora Hale, but still herself, still whole. Just more. Expanded by love, strengthened by adversity, ready for whatever came next. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of winter, but also the certainty of spring. Life would go on. There would be hard days ahead, there always were. But there would also be good days, joyful days, days filled with laughter and love and the ordinary miracles of family. Nora fell asleep in her husband's arms, her children safe in the next room, her heart full to bursting with gratitude. She'd walk through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed but alive. Scarred but stronger, ready to build something lasting from the ashes of what she'd lost. And somewhere beyond the stars, she liked to think Thomas was watching, smiling, grateful that his family had found safety and love in the arms of a cowboy with a good heart and a steady hand. Winter came to Eagle Bend Ranch with a gentleness that surprised everyone who'd survived the brutal drought of the previous year. Snow fell in soft, steady increments rather than the howling blizzards the territory was known for, and the temperatures, while cold, never dropped to the bone-breaking extremes that could kill cattle and freeze water lines. It was as if nature itself had decided to offer mercy after the hardships of the past seasons. Nora woke on Christmas morning to find frost painting delicate patterns on the bedroom window and Caleb's arm warm across her waist. 3 months of marriage had taught her the rhythms of his breathing, the way he always woke just before dawn, no matter how late they'd stayed up the night before. The particular way he held her close even in sleep, as if reassuring himself she was real. She turned carefully in his embrace, studying his face in the dim pre-dawn light. Marriage to Caleb was different from her marriage to Thomas in ways both small and profound. Thomas had been a dreamer, always looking toward a brighter future, sometimes at the expense of dealing with the present. Caleb was grounded, practical, focused on the here and now while still making plans for tomorrow. Thomas had loved her with passionate intensity, but had sometimes been blind to her daily struggles. Caleb noticed everything, when she was tired, when she needed help, when she just needed someone to listen. It wasn't better or worse than what she'd had before. It was simply different. And she loved him with a depth that sometimes surprised her, a love built not just on passion, but on partnership, on shared work and shared purpose, and the daily choosing of each other over and over again. "You're staring," Caleb murmured without opening his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips. "You're worth staring at." Liar. But he pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Vance. Merry Christmas. She nestled against his chest, savoring these quiet moments before the children woke and the day's demands began. I still can't believe how much has changed in less than a year. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm dreaming, Caleb admitted, that I'll open my eyes and be back in a bunkhouse somewhere, alone, with nothing but another cattle drive ahead of me. But you're not. No. His arms tightened around her. I'm here. With you. With Samuel and Emma. With a home and a purpose, and everything I never knew I needed. They lay together for a few more precious minutes before the sound of small feet pattering down the hallway announced that the children were awake. Samuel burst into the room, Emma close behind, both of them vibrating with excitement. It's Christmas! Can we open presents? Did Santa come? Caleb sat up, rubbing his eyes with exaggerated grogginess that made Emma giggle. Santa? Who's Santa? I thought we were expecting a visit from Old Man Winter. Papa Caleb, stop teasing. Emma climbed onto the bed, having taken to calling him Papa Caleb within a week of the wedding. It had made Caleb tear up the first time she'd said it, though he'd tried to hide his emotion. Samuel was more reserved with the title, still processing what it meant to have a new father figure while honoring the memory of Thomas. He usually just called Caleb by his first name, but sometimes, in unguarded moments, Papa would slip out, and each time it did, Nora saw Caleb's face light up with quiet joy. They gathered in the main room where a small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and cranberries the children had made, paper ornaments, and a few precious glass baubles Mrs. Brennan had loaned them. Beneath it were a few modest packages wrapped in brown paper and twine. The children dove for their gifts with appropriate enthusiasm. For Samuel, Caleb had carved an intricate wooden horse, complete with a saddle and reins, far more detailed than the simple toy he'd made months ago. Emma received a rag doll Nora had sewn in secret, with yarn hair and a dress that matched Emma's own. There were small treats, too, peppermint sticks from town, new mittens Mary had knitted, a picture book from the Brennans. For you, Caleb said quietly, handing Nora a small package. Inside was a locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found two tiny photographs, one of Samuel and Emma, and one of her and Caleb on their wedding day. She hadn't even known he'd arranged for photographs to be taken. Dutch knows a man in Sweetwater who does photography, Caleb explained, watching her face anxiously. I thought you might like to have something to carry with you. Our family. It's perfect. Nora's throat was tight with emotion. Caleb, it's absolutely perfect. There's something else. He reached behind the tree and pulled out a larger package, this one wrapped more carefully. This is for all of us, really. Inside was a leather-bound photograph album, and when Nora opened it, she found several photographs already mounted. The wedding photo, pictures of the children playing outside the cabin. A shot of the four of them together, looking like exactly what they were, a family. But what made Nora's breath catch was the first photograph in the album. It showed a young man with kind eyes and an optimistic smile, standing in front of a half-built cabin. Thomas. The photograph must have been taken years ago, in the early days of their homestead, and Nora had no idea how Caleb had obtained it. I went through your things, Caleb said softly. Found it tucked in the bottom of your trunk. I hope you don't mind. I wanted the children to have something to remember him by. Wanted them to see that he's part of this family too, even if he's not here anymore. Nora couldn't speak. She just threw her arms around Caleb's neck and held on tight while tears streamed down her face. This man, this wonderful man who'd come into their lives like a miracle, understood what she needed even before she knew it herself. He wasn't trying to replace Thomas or erase his memory. He was honoring it, making space for the past within the present. Thank you, she finally managed to whisper. Thank you for understanding. Samuel had noticed the photograph and came closer, his young face serious. That's my papa, he said quietly. My first papa. That's right, Caleb said, pulling the boy close. And he was a good man who loved you very much. Don't ever forget that, son. I won't. Samuel looked up at Caleb, his eyes searching. But you're my papa too now, aren't you? If you want me to be. I do. The words were simple but profound, and Nora saw Caleb's eyes grow bright with unshed tears. I want to remember my first papa, but I want you to be my papa too. Is that all right? That's more than all right, Caleb said roughly. That's everything, Samuel. Emma, not wanting to be left out, wedged herself between them. We're a family, she announced with the certainty of a 4-year-old who'd found her place in the world. All of us together. That's right, sweetheart, Nora said, pulling them all into an embrace. All of us together. Later that morning, they walked to the main house for the Christmas feast Mrs. Brennan had been preparing for days. The entire ranch community gathered, the Brennans, Dutch Holloway, all the hands who didn't have family to go home to, the other families who lived and worked on the ranch. Even Sarah Henderson came, though she still maintained a frosty distance from Nora. The meal was abundant: roasted turkey and ham, potatoes and gravy, fresh bread, vegetables from the root cellar, pies and cakes that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. It was a feast of gratitude, a celebration of survival, an acknowledgement that they'd all made it through the hard times and come out stronger. After the meal, Mr. Brennan stood and raised his glass. I want to propose a toast, he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. This past year has been one of the hardest I can remember. We lost good people. We watched the land suffer. We wondered if we'd make it through. He paused, his eyes sweeping the gathering. But we did make it. Because we stuck together. Because we helped each other. Because we remembered that we're stronger as a community than we ever could be alone. His gaze landed on Nora and Caleb. Some of you came to us with nothing. You'd lost everything and were about to lose more. But you didn't give up. You fought for your families, you worked hard, and you became part of ours. That's what Eagle Bend is about. Giving people a chance to rebuild, to start over, to find hope when everything seems hopeless. Hear, hear, Dutch called out, and others joined in. Mr. Brennan raised his glass higher. So here's to survival. Here's to new beginnings. Here's to family, however we define it. And here's to the future. May it be kinder than the past. Everyone drank, and then Mrs. Brennan stood, which was unusual enough that the room fell silent immediately. I have an announcement, she said, her stern face softening slightly. Mr. Brennan and I have been discussing the future of Eagle Bend. We're getting older, and the ranch is getting bigger. We need help managing it, and we need people we can trust. She looked directly at Caleb. Caleb Vance, you've proven yourself to be one of the finest horsemen I've ever seen, but more than that, you've shown exceptional character and judgment. We'd like to promote you to assistant foreman, working directly under Dutch. The position comes with a raise in wages and additional responsibilities, including helping to make decisions about ranch operations. Caleb looked stunned. Mrs. Brennan, I'm honored. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, it's a lot of work. But there was approval in her eyes. As for you, Nora Vance, you've become indispensable to the household operations. I'd like to make you my official assistant, which means you'd help manage not just the kitchen, but all the domestic operations of the ranch. It also comes with a raise. Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Mrs. Brennan replied tartly. I'm not getting any younger, and I need someone who can eventually take over these responsibilities. You've proven you have the skills and the temperament. Then yes, of course, thank you. The room erupted in congratulations and celebration. Mary hugged Nora fiercely, whispering, You deserve this. You've worked so hard. Dutch clapped Caleb on the back, already discussing their new working arrangement. Even some of the hands who'd been uncertain about the quick marriage seemed genuinely pleased for them. Only Sarah Henderson remained apart, her expression disapproving. But as the afternoon wore on and the children played and the adults laughed and shared stories, even she seemed to soften slightly. When Emma accidentally bumped into her while running, Sarah steadied the little girl with a gentle hand rather than a harsh word, and Nora saw something like regret flicker across her face. Later, as people were preparing to leave, Sarah approached Nora. It was the first time she'd voluntarily spoken to her in months. Mrs. Vance, she said formally, I owe you an apology. Nora was too surprised to respond immediately. Sarah continued, her words stiff but sincere. I'm Unkind. In my thoughts and in my words. I judged you harshly because your grief didn't look like mine did, and that wasn't fair. Everyone mourns differently, and everyone heals in their own time. She paused, clearly struggling. You made choices I wouldn't have made, but they were the right choices for you and your children. I can see that now. Thank you, Nora said quietly. That means more than you know. Your husband, the new one, he's a good man, and those children are thriving. That's what matters. Sarah nodded once, formally, then walked away. But some of the tension that had existed between them had eased. That evening, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Caleb and Nora sat together by the fire, wrapped in a quilt, watching the flames dance. Can you believe it? Nora asked. 6 months ago, I was ready to give up everything, and now? Now you have everything, Caleb finished. We have everything. It doesn't feel real sometimes, like I'm going to wake up and find myself back on that dusty road, starving and desperate. You're not. Caleb kissed her temple. You're here, safe, loved, building a life that's real and solid and yours. Ours, Nora corrected. Ours, he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Nora said, I need to tell you something. Caleb tensed slightly. What is it? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Nora held her breath, waiting for his reaction. They hadn't discussed having children together, there hadn't seemed to be time, and with Samuel and Emma already part of their family, she hadn't been sure how he'd feel about adding another. But when she looked at his face, she saw wonder and joy written there in equal measure. You're sure? He asked. I'm sure. About 6 weeks along, I think. A baby. Caleb's hand moved to her stomach, resting there gently as if he could already feel the life growing inside. Our baby. Are you happy? Happy? He laughed, a sound of pure delight. Nora, I'm beyond happy. I never thought I'd have this. A wife, children, a family of my own. And now we're going to have a baby together? You're not worried about the timing, The timing is perfect, Caleb interrupted. Everything about this is perfect. He pulled her closer, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this gift, for giving me everything I never knew I needed. Thank you for saving us, Nora replied, for seeing us on that road and choosing to help instead of riding past, for giving us hope when we'd lost it all. I didn't save you, you saved yourself. I just showed you the way. Then thank you for showing us the way and for walking it with us. They held each other as the fire burned down to embers, talking quietly about the future, about names for the baby, about whether they'd need to add on to the cabin, about how Samuel and Emma would react to having a younger sibling, about all the ordinary, wonderful concerns of people building a life together. The months that followed were busy but joyful. Caleb threw himself into his new responsibilities as assistant foreman, working closely with Dutch to manage the ranch's operations. He proved to have a natural talent for leadership, earning the respect of the other hands through a combination of competence and fairness. The horses he trained were sought after throughout the territory, and the breeding program he developed became one of Eagle Bend's most profitable operations. Nora managed the household with the same efficiency she'd learned from Mrs. Brennan, coordinating the domestic staff, planning meals, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But she also made time for her children, supervising their lessons with the ranch teacher, playing with them in the evenings, creating the kind of stable, loving home she'd always wanted for them. As winter gave way to spring, the valley transformed. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and wildflowers appeared in the meadows, purple lupine and yellow balsam root and delicate white columbine. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and foals were born in the corrals, their spindly legs and curious faces delighting the children. Samuel was growing taller, more confident, spending his days learning from Caleb and the other hands. He could ride now, really ride, sitting a horse like he'd been born to it. He still talked about Thomas sometimes, keeping his first father's memory alive, but he'd also fully embraced Caleb as his papa. The two of them had developed a special bond, often disappearing together to work with the horses or ride the boundary lines. Emma was thriving too, blossoming into a cheerful, chatty little girl who seemed to know everyone on the ranch. She helped Nora in the kitchen, played with the other children, and followed Caleb around like a devoted shadow whenever he was home. She had no memories of the desperate times, the hunger and fear. For her, this was simply life, safe, happy, full of love. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, the ranch women rallied around her. Mary was constantly checking on her, bringing by food and helping with heavier tasks. Mrs. Brennan made sure Nora didn't overwork herself, adjusting her responsibilities as needed. Even Sarah Henderson contributed, sewing tiny clothes for the coming baby with surprising skill. "It's a boy," Mrs. Brennan pronounced one day, studying the way Nora was carrying. "Mark my words, you're carrying low and all out front. That's a boy." "What if it's a girl?" Nora asked, amused. "Then I'll be wrong for the first time in 40 years of predicting babies." Mrs. Brennan's eyes twinkled. "But I'm not wrong." Summer arrived with warm sunshine and long days perfect for outdoor work. The ranch was prosperous, the cattle healthy, the future bright. On a warm July evening, Nora's labor began. Mary fetched Mrs. Brennan and the midwife from town while Caleb paced outside the bedroom, trying to stay calm and failing miserably. Samuel and Emma were with the Johnsons, kept away from the drama but intensely curious about what was happening. The labor was long but not complicated, and as the sun set and stars began to appear, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Mrs. Brennan emerged, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced, "a healthy, loud son with his father's eyes. And Nora's doing fine. Tired, but fine." Caleb rushed into the bedroom to find Nora propped up against pillows, exhausted and sweaty and absolutely radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. When he approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were indeed the same blue-green as Caleb's. "Meet your son," Nora said softly. "Meet Thomas Caleb Vance." Caleb's breath caught. "You named him after—" "After both of you. After the man who gave me my first chance at happiness, and the man who gave me my second." Nora's eyes were bright with tears. "He carries both of your names because he's part of both legacies. Is that all right?" "It's perfect." Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He's perfect. You're perfect. All of this is—" His voice broke. "I never dreamed I could have this, Nora. A family. A real family." "Well, you have one now," Nora said, "and you're stuck with us." "Best place I've ever been stuck." They sat together, admiring their son, until Mrs. Brennan shooed Caleb out so Nora could rest. But before he left, he kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me, for building this life with me, for everything. Thank you for being worth choosing." The next morning, Samuel and Emma were brought to meet their new brother. Samuel was fascinated, wanting to touch the baby's tiny hands and count his fingers and toes. Emma was more cautious but clearly delighted, already planning all the things she'd teach him when he was bigger. "He's really ours?" Samuel asked. "Our brother?" "Really yours," Nora confirmed. "Half-brother, technically, but that doesn't matter. You're all family." "I like his name," Samuel said thoughtfully. "Thomas was my first papa's name." "That's right. We wanted to honor his memory, and to honor Caleb, too. Your new brother connects all of us, past and present." Samuel nodded seriously, processing this information. Then he said, "I think my first papa would be happy, that we're all together and safe, that we have a baby and a home and everything we need." "Mom, I think so too," Nora said, her throat tight with emotion. "I think he'd be very happy." As summer progressed, little Thomas thrived. He was a good baby, alert and curious, studying the world with his striking blue-green eyes. Caleb was a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, walking the floor when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son, Nora fell in love with him all over again. But it wasn't just the baby who had her heart full. It was everything. The way Samuel had become confident and capable under Caleb's mentorship, the way Emma's laughter rang out across the ranch, the way they'd all become genuinely part of the Eagle Bend community. The way life had not just continued after tragedy, but had grown rich and full, and meaningful. One evening in late August, as the sun was setting and painting the valley in shades of gold, Nora stood outside their cabin watching her family. Caleb was teaching Samuel how to throw a rope, both of them laughing when the loop missed the fence post again. Emma was playing with Thomas on a blanket spread in the grass, making faces at him until he gurgled with delight. In the distance, the creek sparkled in the fading light, and cattle grazed peacefully on the hillsides. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd been fighting for on that terrible day when she'd decided to walk to Sweetwater Junction with the intention of giving up her children. How far they'd all come since then. How much had changed. Mary appeared beside her, her own youngest child on her hip. "Beautiful evening," she said. "The most beautiful," Nora agreed. "You look happy." "I am happy. Genuinely, completely happy." Nora paused, then added, "I feel guilty sometimes for being this happy when Thomas is gone. Like I should be sadder or grieving longer or—" "Stop," Mary interrupted gently. "You loved your first husband. You mourned him. You still honor his memory, but you're also living, Nora. That's not betrayal. That's survival. That's choosing joy even after experiencing terrible loss. Thomas would want this for you. I know, and I'm trying to accept that I can honor the past while embracing the present. You're doing more than trying. You're succeeding." Mary squeezed her shoulder. "Look at them. Look at your family. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to celebrate." That night, after the children were asleep and Thomas was settled in his cradle, Caleb and Nora sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their ritual, these quiet moments at the end of the day when they could just be together without demands or responsibilities. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nora asked. "The day we met?" "All the time," Caleb admitted. "I think about how close you came to giving up and how different all our lives would be if I'd ridden past instead of stopping." "Why did you stop?" "Really?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Something just told me to stop. A feeling, an instinct, maybe divine intervention. I don't know. But I saw you and those kids under that dead tree, and I knew I couldn't just ride away. Knew that if I did, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I'm glad you listened to that instinct. So am I. Best decision I ever made." He pulled her closer. "You know what I think about sometimes? All the things that had to happen exactly right for us to meet. If the drought had ended sooner, you wouldn't have been on that road. If I'd left Colorado a day earlier or later, I wouldn't have been there. If you'd given up just a little bit sooner, you might have reached Sweetwater before I found you. So many small choices, so many moments that could have gone differently." "Fate?" Nora suggested. "Maybe, or maybe just luck. Either way, I'm grateful." "Me too." Nora rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think happiness was about having big dreams and chasing them, no matter what. That's what Thomas believed, and I loved him for it. But now I think happiness is about this, about the quiet moments, the steady work, the family you build day by day, about surviving the hard times and appreciating the good ones." "That's wisdom," Caleb said softly. "Hard-won wisdom." They sat in comfortable silence, and then Nora said, "I want to tell you something I've been thinking about." "What is it?" "I want to find Thomas's grave. Go back to the homestead and mark it properly. Plant some flowers, maybe. I want the children to know where their father is buried, to have a place they can visit if they want to. And I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to say goodbye properly. Not to forget him, but to acknowledge that chapter of my life is closed, that I'm moving forward." "Then we'll go," Caleb said without hesitation. "Whenever you're ready, we'll all go together. We'll make sure he has a proper marker, and we'll teach the children about him, and we'll honor his memory the way it deserves to be honored. Thank you for understanding, for not being threatened by my past. Your past made you who you are, Nora. I could never be threatened by that." The next month, when Thomas was old enough to travel and the weather was still good, they made the journey back to the homestead. It took most of a day, following the same road Nora had walked with such desperation 6 months earlier. The landscape had changed, the drought had finally broken completely, and while the land would take years to fully recover, there was new grass growing and the creeks were running again. The homestead itself was a sad sight. The cabin had partially collapsed, its roof caved in from neglect and weather. The garden was completely overgrown with weeds. The well was still dry, but Thomas's grave was still there, the crooked cross still marking the spot where he lay. Caleb had brought tools and materials, and while Nora held the baby and watched with Samuel and Emma, he built a proper marker, a wooden cross painted white with Thomas's name and dates carved carefully into the crosspiece. They planted wildflowers around the grave, brought from Eagle Bend and chosen specifically because they were hardy enough to survive without regular care. When the work was done, Nora knelt beside the grave while Caleb kept the children back, giving her privacy. She placed her hand on the earth, feeling the warmth of the sun-baked soil. "Thomas," she said softly, "I kept my promise. The children are safe. They're healthy and happy and growing up with love and stability. Samuel is learning to be a good man, and Emma is bright and joyful, and they both remember you even though Emma was so young. I've told them stories about you, about how hard you worked and how much you loved them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I found someone else. His name is Caleb, and he's good to me, good to the children. We have a baby now, a son. I named him Thomas after you because you'll always be part of our family's story. Always." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I hope you can forgive me for moving on. I hope you understand that I had to survive, that the children needed stability and love. I think you would have liked Caleb. I think you would have been grateful that someone was taking care of us." She wiped her eyes and stood. "I'm not forgetting you. I'm living. Like you would have wanted me to. Like you always encouraged me to do. So this is goodbye, Thomas. Not forever. I'll visit sometimes and I'll make sure the children know your story, but goodbye for now. Rest easy, knowing we're all right." Caleb appeared at her shoulder, his hand warm on her back, and together they walked back to the children. Samuel looked solemn, Emma confused, baby Thomas oblivious in Nora's arms. But they were together, and that's what mattered. As they drove away from the homestead in the wagon Caleb had borrowed for the trip, Nora looked back one last time at the place where she'd tried to build a life with her first husband. It had failed, but she had survived. She'd taken the broken pieces of her dreams and built something new, something stronger, something real. The journey back to Eagle Bend was lighter somehow, as if laying Thomas to rest properly had lifted a weight Nora hadn't realized she'd been carrying. They sang songs to pass the time, played simple games with the children, stopped to rest by a stream and eat the lunch Mrs. Brennan had packed for them. When Eagle Bend came into view as evening approached, Samuel said, "I'm glad we went to see Papa Thomas, but I'm glad we're going home too." "Me too, sweetheart," Nora said. "Me too." The years that followed were good ones, though not without their challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick livestock and broken equipment, arguments and misunderstandings, and all the normal friction of family life. Little Thomas grew into an energetic toddler, then a curious child. Nora had another baby, a daughter they named Grace. Samuel became a skilled horseman and eventually one of Eagle Bend's most trusted hands. Emma grew beautiful and kind, helping care for her younger siblings and eventually teaching other ranch children their letters. Through it all, Caleb and Nora built their life together with patience and love and the kind of commitment that comes from choosing each other every single day. They had their disagreements, their hard moments, but they always came back to the foundation they'd built on that dusty road: mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb took Nora back to the spot where they'd first met. He'd arranged for the children to stay with the Johnsons, and they rode out together in the early morning, the same time of year they'd first encountered each other. The dead cottonwood tree was still there, though new growth had appeared around it, fresh trees pushing up from the earth. Where once there had been only dust and death, now there was grass and wildflowers and the sound of birds singing. "I wanted you to see this, Kim," Caleb said. "How things change, how life comes back even after everything seems lost." Nora dismounted and walked to the tree, running her hand over its weathered bark. "I was so scared that day, so certain I was making the only choice available to me. But you were wrong. There were other choices. You just couldn't see them yet. And then you appeared." She turned to face him. "Like a miracle." "Not a miracle. just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. He joined her by the tree, taking her hands in his. But what we built after, that was the real miracle. The family we created, the love we grew, the life we made together. That's the part worth celebrating. I love you, Nora said simply. I loved you then, though I couldn't admit it yet. I love you now. I'll love you tomorrow and every day after that. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible to love someone. He kissed her there, under the old tree where their story had begun, and Nora felt the completeness of her journey. From desperation to hope, from loss to love, from barely surviving to truly living. It had been a hard road, but she'd walked it, and it had led her here, to this man, this life, this moment of perfect clarity and gratitude. They rode back to Eagle Bend hand in hand, just as they'd ridden that very first time, but now they weren't strangers bound together by circumstance. They were partners, lovers, parents, friends. They were a family. That evening, as the ranch settled in for the night and Nora prepared dinner in their cabin, larger now, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, she looked around at the life she'd built. Samuel helping little Thomas with his reading, Emma setting the table while Grace played at her feet, Caleb coming through the door with an armload of firewood and a smile for his wife, the photograph album on the shelf holding memories of both past and present, honoring everything they'd been and everything they'd become. This was more than survival, this was thriving. This was the life she'd been fighting for all those months ago when hunger had driven her toward an impossible choice. This was the answer to prayers she'd been too broken to articulate, the hope that had seemed forever lost, the love she'd thought she'd never feel again. Caleb caught her eye across the room and smiled. And in that smile, Nora saw her entire future. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real and solid and worth every hardship they'd endured to reach it. She smiled back, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude and joy and the simple, profound blessing of being alive. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. The past was honored, the present was cherished, and the future stretched out bright and full of possibility. They had survived, they had rebuilt, they had loved and been loved in return. And that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything. The two search is https Josh YouTube.com watch V BJF DK390. Here's a cinematic 5-part dramatic summary, 380 words, of Starving Widow said, "Take my children," the cowboy answered, "I'll take you too." Rewritten in American storytelling style, with new character names never used before in your CB project. The pacing follows the full dramatic arc: opening, rising action, climax, resolution, breakthrough, and ending, with a complete emotional closure. Awesome. Title: The Cowboy Who Took Her Children and Her Heart. Pass 1. Opening: The Road to Surrender. Wyoming Territory, 1873. Under a pitiless sun, Nora Hale clutched her 2 starving children and stared at the dry fields where her husband now lay buried. The drought had killed everything: her garden, her hope, and her faith. With nothing left but grief and an empty pantry, Nora made the most agonizing choice a mother could. She would walk to town and ask the Reverend to find homes for her children before they starved. Dust burned her throat as she whispered, "We'll be all right soon." But she didn't believe it. 2. Rising action. The Cowboy on the Road. Halfway to Sweetwater Junction, a rider appeared through the heat shimmer. A tall man on a chestnut stallion, his face half-shadowed beneath a worn hat. Caleb Vance, a cattle driver scouting ahead for his herd, reined in when he saw the widow and her children. He offered food. Pride made Nora refuse until her son whimpered from hunger. As they ate, Caleb learned her story: the death, the drought, the plan to give up her little ones. Something inside him cracked. "There's a ranch north of here hiring for the season," he said gently. "You can work there. Keep your children with you. Let me take you." 3. Climax. The Firelight Promise. That night they camped by a dry creek, her children sleeping between them. Beneath the stars, Nora told him of the husband who had loved her into courage. Caleb spoke of a sister he lost in a drought years ago, the same kind of loss that had taught him never to walk away from suffering again. When Nora whispered, "I was going to give up my babies," Caleb reached for her trembling hand. "You don't have to anymore. I'll take them, and I'll take you too." 4. Resolution. A cabin of second chances at Eagle Bend Ranch. Caleb found her honest work and built her a home with his own hands. He stayed to help, teaching the children to ride and Nora to laugh again. When she thanked him, he only said, "You saved me too." 5. Breakthrough and ending. The new beginning. Months later, Caleb returned from the trail, this time not as a drifter, but as a man with a purpose. On Christmas morning, he placed a ring in Nora's work-roughened hand. "You gave me family," he said. "Let me give you forever." Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. Outside, the Wyoming wind carried their laughter through the golden fields, a sound born from hunger, hope, and a cowboy's promise that love could feed them all.